rode at the head of his host, boots stained with the dust of winding roads that cut between gentle hills and dense thickets of pine. The heavy scent of the pines clawed at the crisp air, and if he tilted his head, he could almost imagine the ghosts of winter swirling beyond the canopy. His wolf's head cloak, pinned at his collarbone, was ragged from battle and travel alike, but it was the symbol of who he was, the king in the north, proclaiming his right amid a realm fractured by war and greed. Gray wind padded beside him, silent as a shadow, one ear flicking at the slightest rustle of movement in the brush. They had ventured far south to find their paths entangled with an unlikely captive. Melisandre, known as the Red Woman, once perched at the side of Stannis Baratheon like a prophet made flesh. She walked behind them now, bound at the wrists by thick rope, her red hair flaring around her cheeks in the gathering gloom. Torchlight flickered along the road as the host halted for the night, men scurrying to set up tents, feed the horses, and gather kindling for the watchfires. Melisandre was given no tent, only a spot near a withered oak, her ankles tethered to a stake. But she did not shrink from the chill creeping in. The glow in her eyes seemed warm enough to heat her from within. Whenever Robb glanced her way, he found her gazing back with that uncanny calmness, as though already thinking many moves ahead in the game of gods and kings. They had wrested her from the clutches of Stannis's defeated camp in the chaos following a small skirmish near a stream swollen by autumn rains. The Baratheon force had been en route to storm an outpost rumored to be held by Lannister men, but Robb's scouts had intercepted them by surprise. In that confusion, Melisandre had been taken prisoner, having strayed too far from the center of Stannis's host in her own search for signs or visions. By the end of the day, Robb had the Red Woman tethered in his camp, though a small part of him wondered if he had captured her or she had somehow let herself be caught. That evening, a sharp wind scoured the campsite, rustling the pines and making torches flare. The men tried to ignore her presence, though they whispered in hushed tones about red shadows and unholy powers. It was rumored she could birth monstrous apparitions in the shape of living shadows, could beckon flames and see the future in their dance. The men kept their eyes averted whenever she passed, if only to ward off whatever curses might lurk in her gaze. Catelyn Stark had counseled caution, reminding Robb of the Northmen's distrust for any southern magic. And this was no simple hedge wizard, this was a Red Priestess of Lawler, the Lord of Light, infamous and beloved by none in the north. And yet, within a fortnight of her captivity, Melisandre had revealed a surprising willingness to speak. She had not railed at her captors. Instead, she observed them, questioned them calmly, and even at times offered small counsel, advice that might have been manipulative or sincere. They had marched for days, making their way to Riverrun to gather with the remnants of Robb's outriders and regroup before pressing on. On the 20th night since her capture, as the sky bled saffron at sunset, Robb approached her place by the fire. They had tied her feet lightly in case she tried to flee, but no one truly believed she would run. She turned her face up to greet him, and the ropes around her wrists looked strangely out of place. She wore them like an adornment, as if defying their meaning. "The war is going poorly for you, King in the North," she said softly, her voice somehow blending with the crackle of the flames. Robb's jaw tensed. The war had stalled in a nightmarish stalemate. Much of the North lay in ruin after Iron-born raids and the depredations of ruthless lords who had sworn to the Lannisters. And though Robb had known victory on many fields, betrayal and heartbreak had cost him dearly, the loss of Winterfell, the known death of his younger brothers, though the truth of that was uncertain, and rumors about the youngest Starks circulated daily. The devastation weighed on his heart like a millstone. "I will press on," Robb said, trying to keep his voice firm. "I have made mistakes and the cost has been great, but I am a Stark. I will see justice done." Melisandre held his gaze. "You think I have no place in your justice. You think me a foreigner, a traitor even, one who has thrown her lot in with the Baratheon pretender. But I serve a higher cause. The fires do not lie, Robb Stark. I have seen you in the flames. And I have seen your father." "My father is long dead," Robb said, the bitterness arising in him unbidden. The memory of that day in King's Landing still haunted him. Ned Stark's honorable face shone to the crowds, followed by the stroke of a headsman's sword under Joffrey's twisted decree. "Death is only the beginning," Melisandre replied. "The Lord of Light is the great redeemer of souls. All can be returned to the fire if the cause is just and the will is strong." He found himself swallowing a sudden dryness in his throat. "You speak nonsense. Sorcery." She smiled as the shadows of flames danced across her cheeks, painting them the color of blood. In the darkness, men see illusions. But you have faced the darkness beyond the wall, have you not? In the north, you know the dead do not always rest as they should. Robb's stomach tightened. His men had brought back rumors of whites in the far north. He had heard from scattered allies of the terrifying threat that stirred beyond the wall, yet even as king in the north, he was embroiled in wars south of the neck, powerless to unite the realm against such a threat. "You think to raise my father's ghost?" he whispered, a creeping sense of dread mingling with a strange hope. "No ghost," Melisandre said. "I speak of a rebirth in flame. Your father was an honorable man, loved by many, hated by few. He died the victim of cruelty. In the darkness, I have glimpsed another path. The powers I serve can return him, if only as a vessel of his old self. He could become a symbol for you to rally your bannermen, to send fear into your enemies, to guide the north against the terrors that come." Silence gathered around them, broken only by the faint hoot of an owl in the distance. Robb stared at her, uncertain, shaken to his marrow. He should have declared her words lies on the spot. And yet, he could not deny a flicker of longing that rose from the darkest parts of his heart. It was another week before the conversation resumed. By then, Robb's host had grown tense. Constant retreat southward in the face of gathering Lannister and Frey forces threatened to box them in. That same tension had chiseled lines of doubt and weariness into Robb's face. He felt the burden of leadership more heavily than ever before. Some nights, as he lay in a makeshift cot, he found himself recalling Melisandre's promise. No matter how he tried to push it away, his mind drifted to the image of his father's gray eyes sparking open again, not in a rotted visage, but in some form preserved by the Lord of Light's design. Could it be done? Was it a monstrous defiance of nature? And if it were monstrous, would he do it all the same to save the North from the horrors that men and others had in store? When he could bear it no longer, Robb ordered that she be brought to his tent, under guard of 4 of his most trusted men. The Red Woman stepped over the threshold, her robes dragging over the muddy ground. The tent was lit by a brazier, and the smoke clung to Robb's hair and cloak. He dismissed his men, though they did not go far, only a few paces away outside, near enough that if the sorceress tried something, they could rush in. He looked at her face, pale beneath its garnet sheen, and breathed, "Tell me, if I were to allow you your freedom, would you do it? Could you truly bring him back?" She regarded him with the quiet intensity of someone who sees the puzzle pieces of destiny laid before her. "To bring back a man so long dead, we would need his bones. It requires sacrifice as well, blood, life, devotion to the flame. It is not done lightly, but I have seen it in the fires, Robb Stark. The old wolf can rise in the name of the Lord of Light. He can be reborn a warrior of flame, freed from the illusions of the old gods. And you think I would submit to your god for this? I think you have already glimpsed the truths hidden in the dark. You are no stranger to sorrow. You feel the cold wind of fate howling around you. To stand against it, all men and women must call upon powers that might preserve the living. The great other advances, the darkness that will swallow the world if we do nothing. You can help me strike a blow against that darkness." Robb clenched his fists. He could hear the pulse in his ears. "You asked for my father's bones. They were sent north after his beheading but never reached Winterfell. Last we heard, they had been waylaid somewhere in the Riverlands. The war scattered them. I don't even know who might still carry them." Melisandre lifted her chin. "We must find them first. This is not impossible. The bones of Ned Stark are prized by those who loved him and even by those who would spite him. Through the flames, I can glean their location. Release me from this captivity and I will guide you." He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was like an echo in a cavern. "I will do it. But if you betray us, Red Woman, no shadow in your belly will save you from the wrath of the North." She bowed her head and the flames crackled in the brazier as though in approval. Thus began the uneasy alliance. Word spread among the camp that Robb had decided to trust the sorceress. There were whispers of sacrilege, talk of abomination, but no man dared speak openly against the king in the north when his eyes blazed with a newfound sense of direction. The next day they cut Melisandre's bonds, though she remained under constant watch. She asked for a place at the largest fire the men lit at dusk and demanded it be fed well until the flames towered above any man's height. Around it she chanted soft words in a foreign tongue, or perhaps the common tongue twisted by incantation. Her voice rose and fell, and at times the swirling flames leapt so high that the men present backed away in alarm. But Robb stood his ground, enthralled by the shifting patterns of light and shadow that played upon the red woman's face. At length, the fire died to a mere flicker, and Melisandre slumped forward, sweat trailing down her brow. With trembling arms, she beckoned Robb closer. "Harrenhal," she whispered, her voice harsh from chanting. "The bones are in Harrenhal, abandoned in one of the dungeons beneath the Wailing Tower. They were taken there by servants of the Lannisters who planned to ransom them or defile them. The castle changes hands, but the bones remain. That is where we must go." Robb stared at her, heart hammering. He had no idea who controlled Harrenhal at this moment. The great fortress by the God's Eye Lake changed hands repeatedly in this war, Lannisters, then Lord Roose Bolton, then back to some other occupant. Each occupant found the fortress a ruin of ill omen and monstrous, half-melted corridors. "Harrenhal is cursed," he said. "All the more reason to free your father's remains from that wretched place." So Harrenhal became their destination. Robb ordered his men to break camp at first light. They were close to Riverrun, but perhaps it was better to go on the move. Riverrun was besieged by the Freys, and the direct route would be blocked. They would have to travel swiftly and quietly, bypassing the main roads. If the Lannisters still held Harrenhal, or if any of the warring lords had placed men there, they would face a fight. For days they rode, the terrain shifting from rolling fields to abandoned villages to stony ground that carried echoes of old battles. In that time, word reached them of other forces on the march, Tywin Lannister's host pushing to quell any further rebellion in the Riverlands and the Freys fortifying crossings of the Trident. Rumors came as well of the Brotherhood without banners operating in secret, harrying Lannister patrols, robbing the mighty to feed the poor. Yet every day Melisandre rode near the front with Robb, her presence as inescapable as the red sun that set each evening. Grey Wind took no immediate liking to her. The great dire wolf often bared his teeth when Melisandre approached, though Robb noted that the red woman showed no fear. She would merely look at Grey Wind as if appraising some wondrous beast. "The old gods are strong in him," she remarked once. "He bears the mark of the old magic of the north. But there is fire in him, too." Robb did not like how she spoke sometimes, as though everything were a piece of puzzle for her to shape or interpret. But he kept his silence. He needed her, or so he had convinced himself. The nights were cold, the hours uncertain. And sometimes he dreamed of Ned Stark standing tall in the great hall of Winterfell, light streaming through the windows, sword in hand. In those dreams, Ned looked upon him with kindness, but also with a sorrow so deep it threatened to crush Robb's heart. Then Ned would open his mouth as though to speak, and the dream would dissolve into the caw of crows at dawn. Harrenhal loomed on the horizon one gray evening, its melted towers clawing at the sky like the twisted fingers of a giant. The fortress had once been the greatest castle in Westeros, but it was cursed from its very inception, the seat of King Harren the Black, who defied Aegon Targaryen and was burned alive in his halls. Ever since, it changed hands frequently, each new lord meeting a misfortune. As Robb's host approached, they found evidence of fresh battles outside the main gates, rotting banners, charred siege engines, and corpses. The crows had done their work well, and the men muttered that Harrenhal truly was a blight upon the land. Scouts reported that a small contingent of Frey men now occupied the castle, left behind in the chaos of other campaigns. The Freys were sworn to the Iron Throne, or more accurately, to whichever power gave them the greatest advantage. That made them dangerous, even if their numbers were few. The approach to Harrenhal was across a wide, devastated field with a shattered wooden palisade that once served as a forward camp. The main gate beyond was a monstrous arch of black stone, overshadowed by towers dripping with petrified slag. Robb gathered his bannermen. "If there are Freys inside, they'll treat us as enemies," he said, speaking quietly. "But they're few, so perhaps we can send a group under cover of darkness to capture the entrance before they know our full strength." Lord Karstark's replacement, an older cousin, grim of face, nodded. The memory of how Robb executed Lord Rickard Karstark for murdering Lannister prisoners still ached in him sometimes. "We'll take them by surprise, Your Grace," the older Karstark said. "They'll have no time to lock the gates if we're swift." And so they waited until the moon hung like a silver sickle in the sky. The tension was thick in the air as Robb sent his best infiltrators forward. Among them was the great Jon, stealthy as a bull in a glass house, but cunning enough to find unguarded pathways. Within an hour, a whistle sounded from the gloom, the sign that the infiltration was successful. Robb led the rest of the men in a swift rush across the open ground, toward the gate. There was a brief melee at the portcullis as startled Fry guards tried to repel the intruders, but they were overwhelmed. The sounds of steel striking steel echoed off black walls. Gray wind was among them, ripping into the flesh of one hapless Fry soldier. Screams reverberated through the courtyard. They took Harrenhal in a single night, putting the scattered Freys to flight or to the sword. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, the corpses of 24 Fry men lay in the yard, and the rest were either captured or had fled into the gloom of the surrounding forest. Soldiers who had once served Roose Bolton here had left behind little but rancid food stores and half-burned furniture. Still, Harrenhal belonged to Robb Stark for now. His men roved the corridors, dungeons, and towers in search of any sign of Ned Stark's bones. The place was labyrinthine. Doors opened onto long, drafty halls that abruptly ended in collapsed rubble. Entire wings were deserted, thick with dust and spiderwebs. The old kitchen stank of dead rats. The men brought out the captured Freys one by one for questioning. Most claimed ignorance. They had only arrived a fortnight ago, and no one told them anything about bones. But one frightened squire, trembling so hard he nearly dropped his sword, confessed he had heard rumors of precious remains stored in a locked cell in the Wailing Tower's lower levels. He believed they were the bones of some northern lord. Melisandre's eyes flashed at the news, and she led the way into the gloom with uncanny confidence. Robb's men carried torches to illuminate the twisting staircases that spiraled down into the castle's bowels. The Wailing Tower was so named for the eerie sound the wind made through its cracks, giving rise to moans and howls on gusty nights. Even at midday, the gloom was oppressive. The air smelled of damp stone and centuries of death. At last they reached a rusted iron door barred from the outside. With a few sharp blows, they forced it open. Inside, they found a small pile of crates. One had split in the damp, revealing scattered bones that gleamed a dull gray in the torchlight. Robb stepped forward, a lump in his throat. He crouched, picking up the fragments carefully. He recognized the shape of a long bone that could have been from an arm or leg and a partial skull with the jaw sheared away. The sense of memory overwhelmed him, even though these remains bore no clear identity now. The knowledge that these were his father's bones, it felt like an electric presence that made the hair on his arms stand. Melisandre knelt beside him, face grave. "Yes," she murmured. "It is him. I can feel it. The flame in these bones has not died." Robb did not know if that was some trick of the Red Woman's or genuine second sight. He only knew he wanted to cradle these bones and carry them back to Winterfell's crypts where they belonged. But that was not the path he had chosen, was it? He had come to Harrenhal not just to reclaim his father's remains, but to embrace the unholy possibility that they could be used to bring him back. They wrapped the bones in cloth and carried them gently from the cell. Melisandre insisted on preparing a ritual space in the courtyard near the heart of Harrenhal where the ground was blackened from old fires. Robb's men watched with discomfort bordering on horror as she laid out a circle of candles around a pyre. On that pyre, she placed Ned Stark's bones, strewn carefully. She demanded wood from the local forests, copious amounts of it, to build the pyre high enough to burn an ox. Then she asked for a living sacrifice. The men recoiled. Even Robb felt his stomach tighten. "What do you mean, a living sacrifice?" Melisandre's face was grave. "The Lord of Light's gift cannot be won without a price. You want your father back? The flames must devour a life dear to the old gods so that Loloreth's champion may walk again." Catelyn Stark, who had arrived earlier that morning with a handful of riders from Riverrun, immediately protested. "No, this is madness. Robb, you cannot allow the burning of an innocent man." An uneasy silence spread. Many among Robb's men, including northern lords, agreed wholeheartedly. That was not their way. Yet Melisandre's voice cut through the hush with a serpent's hiss. "I did not say it must be an innocent man. There are criminals in these dungeons, traitors who would take the coin of your enemies. But the power is stronger if the blood is rich in meaning." "Meaning?" Robb asked. She looked at him intently. "A bond of the heart. The father's spirit calls out for the blood of his blood. The greatest potency would come from a Stark." Catelyn's face went white. She grabbed Robb's arm as though she feared he might do something unthinkable. He glanced around, seeing the horror in his men's eyes. He stared at Melisandre, voice trembling with suppressed fury. "I will not murder my kin for this." She inclined her head. No, you would not. But the choice stands, the flame demands life. He could feel the ground tilting under him. He had made a bargain with a force he did not fully understand. Now the reality that black sorcery required black payment was laid bare. Could he do it? Would he let her kill some prisoner? A Fry? A Lannister man? Or perhaps one of Roose Bolton's turncoats if they found such a man? But then how is that man's blood rich in meaning? Would that suffice? On the second day after capturing Harrenhal, a man was found skulking in the cells, a knight named Ser Eustace of House Fry, nephew to Walder Frey's third wife or some tangled kinship. He had a rank odor, a broken nose, and a vile mouth. They dragged him before Robb, who tried to interrogate him for information about Fry movements. Ser Eustace spat curses. I'll see you all dead. Your father's bones can rot here for all I care. Robb's anger flared white-hot. But it was Melisandre who raised a staying hand and gave Robb an inscrutable look. His blood is bound by oath to the ones who murdered your father. I feel the resonance. Let him be the one. Catelyn protested, but the men, faced with the knight's fury and hatred, found themselves less troubled by the notion of offering him up. Still, it was no small matter to commit a living man to flames. Robb wrestled with it through a sleepless night. But vengeance for Ned, who had been betrayed by Lannisters, Freys, and turncoats, gnawed at him. At dawn, he gave the word, feeling sicker than he had ever felt. They dragged Ser Eustace to the pyre, his hands and feet bound. He screamed as men forced him to his knees. Melisandre began her chanting in that strange language, her voice rising and echoing off the melted towers. Grey light shrouded the courtyard, and the northern men, along with the few Riverlanders who still served House Tully, watched as an eerie hush fell over the fortress. Melisandre took a torch lit from a brazier and approached the bound knight. Ser Eustace shrank back. You can't do this. This is heresy, he cried. Then, as he struggled, he spat at Robb. You are no true king, you savage whelp. Your father's dead eyes will never open again. Robb's face was stony, but inside he was trembling, uncertain whether he was making the worst mistake of his life. Melisandre's chant grew louder. She lifted the torch and the flames danced in a sudden gust of wind. Then, in one swift motion, she touched the torch to the piled wood. The fire caught, racing up the oil-soaked timbers. Ser Eustace howled in pain as the flames licked at his legs. The smoke billowed, thick and pungent, carrying his screams high into the morning sky. Robb almost turned away, but he forced himself to watch. This was the price, he told himself. The price for the resurrection of Ned Stark. Melisandre lifted her arms. Lord of Light, I call upon you. Let the Father return, let the old wolf rise again, redeemed in your flame. In the name of the Red God, I beseech you, breathe life into these bones. The men heard a roar, or thought they did, echoing between the scorched towers. The flames surged unnaturally high, swirling as if gripped by a ferocious wind. Ser Eustace's cries fell silent, his body hidden by the blaze. The bones of Ned Stark, laid on the highest tier of the pyre, were wreathed in swirling heat. Tension crackled in the courtyard. Robb felt the hair on his arms stand on end. He imagined some presence sliding over the castle walls, searching for a place to root. The old stories of White Walkers and undead nightmares pressed against his mind. For a heartbeat, he feared he had unleashed something truly monstrous. Then, as the blaze peaked, Melisandre let out a triumphant cry. The flames parted at the top of the pyre, revealing the shape of bones hissing in the heat. And then the shape moved. No, it did more than move. The bones seemed to knit together before Robb's astonished eyes, forming an outline of a man's skeleton crowned with flickering tendrils of fire where hair should be. Unholy or miraculous, it was a sight that made grown warriors quail. Slowly, the skeleton contorted. A phantom layer of ashen flesh took shape around it, ephemeral as the wind but growing more distinct with each passing moment. Fire poured from the pyre in tongues and waves, devouring the offering. Then, with a final convulsion of the flames, a figure slumped onto the top of the woodpile, wreathed in smoke. Silence. Not a crow cawed, not a man coughed. Melisandre climbed the pyre's base, unmindful of the simmering coals, though they hissed underfoot. She reached for the figure. Robb strained to see if it was truly his father or some demon in his father's shape. Then the figure drew a shallow breath. It seemed to be Ned Stark, yet changed. His hair was the color of soot, short and ragged. The lines of his face were faintly scarred, as though memory of the beheading had marked him. His eyes flickered open, revealing not the familiar gray but something tinted faintly red by the fire's reflection. He wore no clothing, for he was born anew from the flames, yet Melisandre cast a cloak over his shoulders, a red cloak with a golden-orange lining, the colors of Lawler. The shape that had once been Ned Stark struggled to stand. Melisandre guided him down the pile to the courtyard, where he staggered, his limbs uncertain. The men parted in fear and awe. Catelyn let out a sob, half joyful, half terrified, and reached for him. Robb stood rooted to the spot, his heart hammering like a drum. "Ned," Catelyn whispered. He turned his head at the sound, blinking as though from a deep sleep. His voice was soft, a rasp like embers in a hearth. "Catelyn." "Robb," he looked at them one by one, confusion and recognition warring in his eyes. Then a flicker of anguish twisted his features. "I remember. Joffrey. The sword." Ice, he reached toward his neck as if feeling the phantom cut. Catelyn embraced him, tears streaming down her cheeks. He was warm, almost too warm, as if his flesh still held the furnace heat of the pyre. Robb came forward and took his father's hands, hands that shook slightly but were unmistakably Lord Eddard Stark's. "Father." Robb breathed, hardly daring to believe. Ned Stark regarded him with a sorrowful, weary tenderness. "My boy," he managed. "You've grown so strong." A hush of awe fell across the courtyard, broken only when Melisandre lifted her hands in triumph. "Behold the power of the Lord of Light. The old wolf stands anew." Many men fell to their knees, whether out of reverence or raw terror at what they had witnessed. The flames still raged behind them, devouring what remained of Ser Eustace's body, the price of this unholy miracle. Robb, feeling tears sting his eyes, realized there was no going back. He had resurrected his father, but at a cost that might forever change them all. They guided Ned inside, dressing him in a tunic, offering him water. His hands trembled, and sometimes he stared at them in wonder, as though he could not quite remember how to use them. He drank slowly, eyes flicking about the room with anxious fascination. Now and then a flash of horror crossed his face, as if he recalled the moment of his death. But when he looked upon Robb, a faint smile played at his lips. "You have done what I could not, my son," he said in a hoarse whisper. "You have gathered the North under your banner. I sense a great darkness yet to come." Robb nodded, swallowing. "We face the Lannisters, the Freys, the Boltons, they all conspire to crush us. But there is also word of dark shapes beyond the wall. We have learned that the threat is real, father." Ned closed his eyes as if in pain. "I remember King Robert's talk of the others as tall tales. But you speak true. My dreams, if they are dreams, show me an endless night." They let him rest. Catelyn hovered like a ghost, torn between relief and lingering fear that this might be some demon wearing her husband's face. But his tenderness, his recollections, and the quiet warmth in him all reminded her so powerfully of the man she had loved that she could not hold back her tears. She wept, embracing him, letting hope bloom in her heart that at last some measure of justice could be gained for the North. Melisandre was careful not to intrude too much, but Robb noticed how her eyes shone with a devout confidence. She had proven her power to the northern men who used to mutter curses behind her back. Now, though they were wary, they could not deny she wielded a gift from whatever god she served. The question weighed on Robb: at what further cost would that gift come? By the time the sun had set again and the men had settled into Harrenhal's less collapsed wings, Ned Stark had begun to walk with steadier strides. His voice gained strength. He requested a sword, which Robb provided, a simple blade, as ice was lost to him, melted down by Tywin Lannister for his own devices. Ned tested the balance, swung it lightly, as though reacquainting his muscles with the art of swordplay. The men who witnessed this whispered that the old wolf of the North had truly returned, albeit with eyes that gleamed like embers in certain lights. When Ned Stark strode into the courtyard to address Robb's host, you could have heard a pin drop among the hundreds of men gathered there. Torchlight flickered, dancing across Ned's face. He was draped in a fur cloak that reminded Robb of the old days in Winterfell. His voice, though raw, carried the ring of command. "Men of the North, loyal bannermen of House Stark, I stand before you as living proof that our cause is just. My son, Robb, called you to arms. You followed him for love of the North, for the memory of all we once were. I have returned, not by any cunning of my own, but by the will of a power I scarcely understand. Yet I stand here, flesh and blood. I will not rest until the North is free and justice is done for the crimes inflicted upon us. The Lannisters and their allies have tried to break our spirits. They murdered me to break the wolf pack. But a lone wolf dies while the pack survives. And we, my friends, are still here." A rousing cry erupted among the gathered soldiers. Some looked shaken, tears in their eyes, for they had followed Ned Stark in previous years and now saw him again, as though the final chord of a grim ballad had suddenly reversed. Others shouted all manner of oaths, praising House Stark, praising the king in the North. Above it all, the flames in the torches flickered, and Melisandre smiled as if this was precisely the outcome she'd known would transpire. Robb swallowed, overcome by emotion. He found himself stepping beside his father, lifting his sword in solidarity. "The North remembers," he shouted. The men took up the cry until it bounced off Harrenhal's melted towers. In the days that followed, Ned Stark gradually reacquainted himself with the living world. He asked after his children Sansa and Arya, who were rumored to be captives or fugitives in the south. Bran and Rickon, believed murdered by Theon Greyjoy at Winterfell, though uncertain tales suggested they might still live. Jon Snow, his bastard son, who had gone to the Wall. The weight of all that news sat heavily upon him. And sometimes, when he thought himself alone, Ned would lay a hand against his neck, feeling for a scar that no longer existed but that haunted him all the same. Melisandre spoke to him softly on more than one occasion, presumably teaching him about the Lord of Light, how the resurrection might affect his mind and body. A few of Robb's men worried that she was indoctrinating him into the Red Faith. But Ned was not a man easily swayed from his own moral anchor. If anything, he seemed pensive, torn between gratitude for the life returned to him and reluctance to embrace a foreign creed. Yet he could not deny that a spark burned in him, a power that manifested in small ways. Once, when crossing the courtyard, Ned tripped on uneven stones and the men saw his hand dart out in reflex. A small swirl of heat flared from his palm, enough to singe the stones. He pulled back, stunned. "What is happening to me?" he asked Melisandre. She answered with careful calm. "Death and rebirth in the Lord of Light's name has consequences. Fire runs in your veins. It will serve you in battle and lend you strength, but you must master it. Resist it and it might consume you." Ned found that thought deeply unsettling. He had never sought magical power. He had only tried to live honorably. But now he was inexorably changed. The men who witnessed his flicker of flame began to call him the Fiery Wolf. Whispers spread that Ned Stark could burn his enemies with a mere touch. Though Ned never openly displayed such a power again, many claimed to see a faint glow beneath his skin at night, like coals that refused to die out. The presence of Ned, reborn, galvanized the morale of Robb's host. Messages were sent northward, telling the bannermen that Eddard Stark once again walked among them. Many of the older lords who had bent the knee to Robb out of duty now rushed to reaffirm their oaths with fervor. The Karstarks, the Umbers, the Manderlys, houses once on the brink of fracturing from the war's toll, felt renewed purpose. The king in the north had the blessing of the Old Wolf returned from beyond the grave. But the Lannisters did not remain idle. Scouts brought word that Tywin's forces were on the move, and with them contingents of Freys eager to prove their worth, likely driven by some new deal with the Iron Throne. If Robb was to keep Harrenhal or use it as a stepping stone, he would have to face the Lannisters on the open field. The notion made him sweat in the night, for Tywin was no fool and the numbers might be against them. Yet when Ned heard these tidings, he found Robb in the great hall, an echoing chamber with a high, blackened ceiling, and spoke plainly. "We must fight. We must stand. There can be no more running, my son. If the men see you retreat too often, they will lose faith, no matter my presence here." Robb nodded. "We'll gather what strength we have. I only hope it will be enough." Ned set a hand upon his shoulder. "The North is with you. I am with you." Though Robb did not say it, he was gripped by both hope and dread. The father he revered stood beside him, but so much had changed. Ned's eyes sometimes flared with a distant heat, and his voice could take on a stern resonance that Robb had not heard in the old Ned Stark. Was that the price of resurrection, or just the bitterness of a man who had seen death firsthand? Still, when the horns sounded a few days later, announcing the arrival of a Lannister vanguard, every man in Harrenhal took heart at the presence of the revived Stark patriarch. Ned walked the battlements, gazing out across the plains. Dust clouds on the horizon foretold the coming of thousands of men, likely commanded by Ser Gregor Clegane or some other Lannister bannermen, with the main host under Tywin trailing behind. Robb mustered his men outside the castle walls. Harrenhal, for all its size, would be difficult to defend if the Lannisters laid siege with a large enough army. Better to meet them in the field, use the open terrain to let the northern cavalry strike. Ned and Robb agreed on a strategy, a feigned retreat on one flank that might draw the Lannisters into a trap. The day of battle dawned with a grim hush, the sky heavy with ash-colored clouds. Robb donned his armor, polished but bearing the scars of past fights. Ned wore lighter armor, as if uncertain how his newly reborn flesh would bear a heavier load. Yet in his hand he gripped a long sword, the blade glinting with faint red reflections, as though it too was touched by Lawler. Melisandre stood atop Harrenhal's gatehouse, gazing at the field, a half-smile on her lips. The Lannister vanguard arrived first, brandishing the lion's sigil on scarlet banners. Robb's outriders engaged them, and the clamor of steel against steel shattered the morning calm. Trumpets blared. The northern cavalry surged forward, slamming into the enemy lines. For a time, the swirling chaos of battle consumed all sense of direction. Robb and Grey Wind fought side by side, cutting down Lannister men who reeled under the savage onslaught. Archers on Robb's right flank loosed volley after volley, peppering the Lannisters with arrows. Then, from the enemy's rear, a thunderous wave of reinforcements appeared, Tywin's main force, gleaming in gold-trimmed armor. War horns sounded, carrying across the field. Lannister knights slammed into the northern left flank, the sound of their horses' hooves like rolling thunder. Robb's men faltered, pressed by the sheer weight of the assault. In the midst of this chaos, Ned Stark rode on a dark horse, rallying the Northmen who saw him. His presence was like a living legend reborn, stiffening their spines. At one point, Robb glimpsed Ned swinging his sword in a tight arc. A spray of sparks, no, was it flame, flashed from the blade, and the Lannister knight before him reeled back, howling as if burned. The men nearby cried out, half in terror, half in awe. But Tywin's numbers could not be dismissed. The Northmen threatened to crumble under the Lannisters' repeated charges. Robb gave the signal for his feigned retreat on the left flank, hoping to draw the enemy forward. The riders pulled back, letting the Lannisters chase them. In that moment, from behind a slight rise in the terrain, Great John Umber emerged with fresh reserves, smashing into the exposed Lannister flank. The clash was brutal, the ground trembling under the collision of war horses. Grey Wind took down Tywin's standard-bearer, teeth ripping into the man's throat. The Scarlet Lion banner fell in a tangle of cloth. Cheers rose from the Northmen, but the battle was far from won. Roving clusters of combatants formed, dust and screams filling the air. Robb fought with all the fury of youth, mindful that one stray arrow could end him. He glimpsed Ned on foot now, his horse having been slain by a spear thrust. Ned's cloak was scorched, whether by enemy torches or by some internal flame he unleashed, Robb did not know. A ring of Lannister men converged on him, determined to bring down this impossible threat. But Ned met them with grim resolve. Robb saw flames lick along the edge of Ned's sword, though the steel did not melt or blacken. It cleaved through shields, and the men who advanced on Ned fell back in terror, crying, "He's a demon. Demon of the North." The swirl of violence threatened to swallow them all. Robb hardly knew if the plan was succeeding. He only knew he had to hold the line until the Lannisters broke or until Tywin ordered a withdrawal. A horn sounded from the enemy's side, then another. Trumpeters signaled some shift in their formation. Suddenly, the center parted and a group of heavily armored knights rode FO. Reward with practiced discipline. Robb realized, to his horror, that Tywin himself might be with them, intending to strike at the heart of the northern host and slay their leaders. The knights slammed into a wedge of Northmen. Robb tried to rally them, but the confusion was too great. Within moments, the Lannisters had carved a path to where Ned stood. Robb urged his horse forward, desperation spurring him on. He saw Ned turn as the knights encircled him, 6 men in heavy plate, all bearing the golden lion upon their breasts. One lowered his visor, brandishing a flail spiked with black iron. "Stand aside, Wraith," one of them snarled. "The father of traitors has no place in this realm." Ned faced them, sword held at the ready. "I am Eddard Stark, and I stand for the North," he said. "You will find no surrender here." One knight charged, flail whirling. Ned stepped aside, the flames along his sword's edge striking the flail's chain. Sparks flew, and the knight cried out as a sudden burst of heat seared through his gauntlet. Another knight lunged from the side, aiming a lance at Ned's torso. Ned twisted, the lance nicked his shoulder, drawing blood, but in the same movement Ned brought his sword across in a blinding arc. Fire flared, and the knight's armor screeched under an impossible heat. The smell of scorched flesh turned Robb's stomach. Robb fought to reach his father. Lannister soldiers closed around him, forcing him to parry and slash. Grey Wind lunged, snapping a man's leg. The soldier dropped, shrieking. In the ring of knights, Tywin Lannister emerged, a forbidding presence in gold-trimmed plate. His green eyes flicked over Ned Stark with cold disdain, though Robb thought he saw a flicker of disbelief at the sight of Ned alive. "Stark," Tywin said in a voice that carried even amid the chaos. "So the tales are true. You cheat death like a red sorcerer's puppet." Ned steadied himself, blood trailing from his wounded shoulder. "You will pay for what you did to my family, Lannister." Tywin snorted. "Harrenhal's curses are strong indeed, but I have never feared curses. I only fear the folly of men who cling to vain hopes." He lifted his sword. "If you are truly alive, then you can die again." He spurred his horse forward, swinging a massive blade. Ned raised his flaming sword to parry. The clash boomed through the air, and Robb felt his heart lurch. Tywin was a seasoned war commander, but not known for direct combat, yet he wielded the blade with formidable strength. Ned staggered but did not fall. Sparks flew and the flame along his sword's edge flared, forcing Tywin to reel his mount back lest it be scorched. Another knight came at Ned's flank. Ned ducked, pivoted, and rammed the hilt of his blade into the knight's visor, sending him sprawling. But Tywin wasted no time. He bore down again, sword raised high. Ned moved to block, but he was not as quick as he once was. Too many memories of the beheading hammered at his mind, and the wound in his shoulder bled freely. In that moment, Robb broke free of the throng, gray wind at his side. He flung himself at Tywin's horse, slashing at its flank. The horse shrieked and bucked, nearly throwing Tywin. The Lannister lord twisted in the saddle, turning furious eyes on Robb. "Traitor boy!" Before Tywin could steady his mount and strike, gray wind leapt, jaws clamping onto the horse's throat. The beast went down in a flailing, screaming mass. Tywin tumbled from the saddle, rolling in the dust. Ned advanced, sword gripped in shaking hands. Tywin scrambled to rise, fending off the dire wolf with his sword, but gray wind tore at his arm. Sparks flew as Tywin's blade clashed against the wolf's snapping jaws. The old lion was cornered, forced to focus on gray wind to avoid disembowelment. That gave Ned time to close the distance. Tywin twisted around just in time to see Ned's blade descending, wreathed in flickering flame. He raised his sword in desperation. Steel met steel, but Ned's strike was fueled by something beyond mortal strength, a righteous fury that glowed in his embers for eyes. The Lannister sword snapped under the impact. Ned's blade came down on Tywin's breastplate with a burst of flame. The Lord of Casterly Rock let out a choking cry. Silence seemed to settle over that patch of battlefield. Robb stared in shock as Tywin Lannister, the architect of so many cruelties, the man who had orchestrated war after war, collapsed to his knees. His armor glowed red-hot at the point of impact, smoke rising from the lethal crack in the plate. Gray wind backed away, teeth bared, coat matted with blood. Tywin tried to speak, coughed up blood. Then he pitched forward onto the trampled grass. Ned looked down, face a mask of sorrow and grim resolution. He did not relish this kill. There was no triumph in his eyes. Only the finality of an old vendetta. Robb shook himself out of his stupor. "Father, you did it." But Ned did not reply. His sword fell from his hand, the flames upon it sputtering out. He sank to one knee, pressing a hand to his wounded shoulder. The edges of his vision were likely swimming with pain and exhaustion. Robb rushed to him, supporting him under the good arm. All around them, the Lannister lines began to buckle. Word spread that Tywin was fallen, the lion cut down. Panic rippled through the enemy ranks. Shouts turned to cries of retreat. The Northmen roared in exultation, surging forward to press the advantage. When the dust settled, the field was strewn with the dead of both sides, but the victory was Robb's. His men had captured scores of prisoners, including lesser Lannister knights who had not managed to flee. Harrenhal remained firmly in Stark hands, and the dreaded Tywin Lannister was gone. They carried Ned inside Harrenhal's walls, where the maester did his best to staunch the shoulder wound. Melisandre lingered at the periphery, hands folded as she murmured a prayer of thanks to Lawler. She claimed the Lord of Light had granted them this victory. Robb stood by, quiet and shaken. By dusk, Ned was resting fitfully. Robb came to his bedside, finding Catelyn dozing on a stool nearby, one hand still clasped around Ned's. When she saw Robb, she roused herself and brushed tears from her cheeks. "He is feverish," she whispered. "Melisandre says it's part of his condition, that the fiery spirit in him can burn too hot if he is grievously hurt." Robb pressed his lips together. "Will he recover?" "She believes so. But it will take time. The sorcery that revived him, it changed him, Robb. He's more fragile in some ways, more fearsome in others." Robb nodded. He thought of the moment Ned's sword had flared to meet Tywin's. That could not have been accomplished by any normal man. And yet the cost was high. He knelt and placed a hand on Ned's brow. It was searing hot, as though an inner fire raged. Catelyn looked at him with eyes that had known too many sorrows. "Is this truly the man we lost in King's Landing?" Robb bowed his head. "He is. But different." She squeezed Ned's hand gently. "I will stay with him." Robb left them, stepping out into Harrenhal's great courtyard, where the fires still burned. The stench of death lingered from the battle. Some men dragged bodies into piles for burning or burial. Others erected makeshift tents to treat the wounded. Melisandre stood near a brazier, her red robes stirring in a slight breeze, face lit by flickering coals. He approached her, not knowing quite what to feel. "We have done what we set out to do," he said. "My father is returned and Tywin Lannister is dead. How many men have died to make this happen? How many more will die?" Melisandre's gaze was like the heart of a candle flame. "This is war, Robb Stark. And there is a greater war yet to come." She looked toward the north as if she could see beyond the horizon, beyond the wall. The great other will not rest. The cold darkness sweeps down. You will need your father's fiery spirit in the battles ahead. And you will need me. Robb exhaled a long breath, the weight of leadership pressing on him. You have proven your power, but never forget that I am of the North. We hold to our own ways. She inclined her head slightly. As you wish, your grace. In the days that followed, word spread throughout the realm that Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, had returned from death to slay Tywin Lannister at Harrenhal. The rumor carried like wildfire, shocking lords and common folk alike. Some claimed Ned had become an instrument of Lawler. Others whispered he was a flaming white and abomination. The small folk had their own legends, mixing the old gods and the new, weaving them into a tapestry of wonder and dread. Yet the effect on House Stark's standing was undeniable. Many who had wavered now rallied more strongly than ever to Robb. Even the fractious river lords found fresh courage, seeing that the mighty lion's head of Casterly Rock had been severed. The Iron Throne in King's Landing would quail at the blow. The Freys, who had sworn themselves to Tywin and the Lannisters, were momentarily leaderless in strategy. Walder Frey himself was rumored to be in a black rage, fearing retribution from the undead Stark. As Ned gradually recovered, Robb consulted with him about the next steps. The war still raged on multiple fronts. Stannis Baratheon lurked in Dragonstone, having lost Melisandre but perhaps still holding claims to the throne. King Joffrey reigned in King's Landing, though the blow to House Lannister's leadership was severe. The Tyrells might move in ways unpredictable. And overshadowing it all, winter drew nearer, the darkest winter in living memory, with the threat of the others looming. Ned, leaning against a stone wall in Harrenhal's yard, looked up at the roiling clouds. A storm is coming, Robb. Not just here, but everywhere. The White Walkers stir in the far north. We must unite the realm if we're to survive the long night. Robb studied his father's face, etched with lines of weariness. How can we unite a realm so broken? Ned's gaze shifted to Melisandre, who stood some distance away. With fire, or with faith, or with the old ways? I do not know. But the days of squabbling over crowns must end. Winter is here, or very near. Even the dragons of old might not be enough if we do not stand as one. Robb felt a pang in his heart, recalling rumors that Daenerys Targaryen across the sea had birthed real dragons into the world. Could that be true? If so, might she ally with them? Or would she see them as enemies? As time stretched on, the seeds of fear spread in King's Landing. A half-desperate Joffrey redoubled his cruelty, urging his mother Cersei to find ways to crush the Northern Rebellion. But without Tywin, the Lannisters lacked their spine. Chaos erupted in the capital. The Tyrells might attempt a power play. Meanwhile, the black banners of House Bolton had vanished, rumored to be skulking in the north or forging deals with the Ironborn. Through it all, the sightings of Eddard Stark in Harrenhal or leading outriders in the Riverlands persisted like a legend come alive. The men who fought alongside him swore that sometimes, in the midst of battle, his blade shimmered with an inner heat. Others whispered that when he prayed in the castle's godwood, what remained of it, steam rose from the pool around the weirwood's roots. Robb's own sense of destiny was at once buoyed and burdened. This father, resurrected by red magic, served as a fiery symbol for the North, and yet the father he had known was forever changed. Late one evening, after a small victory against a Lannister scouting party, Robb found Ned standing alone by a brazier in one of the half-ruined halls. The flicker of flame illuminated the hollows of Ned's cheeks. He turned as Robb approached, managed a weary smile. "My son." Robb clasped his father's hand. "Does it still hurt?" He gestured to the shoulder wound. Ned nodded. "Pain is a reminder that I'm still mortal. But it's not the wound that troubles me most." "Then what?" Robb asked quietly. Ned looked past him as if searching for answers in the shadows. "When I was dead, there was darkness. Only darkness. Then a warmth, a spark. I followed it back, and here I am. Sometimes I wonder if I truly belong here now." "You do," Robb said fiercely. "We need you, father." Ned's gaze fell to the flickering flames. "Need me, or need the symbol? All my life, I tried to do my duty to protect the North, to keep the realm from tearing itself apart. And yet everything unraveled. The illusions of honor in King's Landing, the betrayal, it all ended with my head on a spike." Robb lowered his voice. "We have a second chance. With you leading and me at your side, we can—" Ned placed a hand on Robb's shoulder. The heat of his touch was a gentle warmth now, not the searing burn it had been after the battle. "I see now that the war for the throne is but a distraction from the true war to come. The White Walkers are not a children's story. They march on the living, bringing a cold that will devour everything if we remain divided. If we do not gather every sword, every flame," Robb nodded. "We'll do it, father. The North will stand together. Then we'll find a way to make the rest of the realm see sense. Perhaps we can call the banners to face the real threat. Ned squeezed his shoulder. I hope so. As the weeks passed, new alliances began to form. Some river lords and even certain storm lords disillusioned with the Baratheon cause flocked to Robb, hearing that Ned Stark, the honorable hand of the late King Robert, was alive. They believed he might broker a more just peace if the North prevailed. The victory over Tywin had shaken the realm to its core. Cersei Lannister no longer had her father's cunning to rely on. She was rumored to be enlisting Qyburn's dark experiments or searching for any means to hold power. Meanwhile, Walder Frey stewed at the twins, uncertain whether to bend the knee anew or face the fiery wrath of the resurrected Stark. But the true threat was not political. Whispers from the wall spoke of abandoned wildling villages, of whites prowling the tundra. The ragged rangers of the Night's Watch were ill-equipped to fend them off. Jon Snow's name appeared in the rumors. He had apparently left the Watch to forge alliances with wildlings, or so some claimed. Others said he had been killed by his black brothers for desertion. The truth was unclear. In Harrenhal's courtyard, Ned Stark took up training once more, seeking to master the flickers of fire within him, to harness them without letting them rule him. Melisandre guided him at times, though she never pressed him to worship Lawler wholeheartedly. He was a man of the old gods, though changed by the Red God's power. She taught him to calm his mind so the flames would not surge uncontrolled. He practiced with Robb in swordplay, father and son sparring as they had in Winterfell's yard years ago. And so it was that the North found a new sense of unity under two wolves, the king in the North, Robb Stark, tempered by war, and Eddard Stark, reborn in fire. A beacon of strength that carried both hope and a chilling reminder of what it cost to challenge House Stark. Ravens flew in all directions, carrying the message that the Starks were not beaten but ascendant, and that the North would soon march with renewed purpose. Down in the crypts of Harrenhal, what served as crypts for that cursed fortress, Melisandre lingered one night, speaking words to the darkness. She claimed to see visions of a final stand, an endless snows cape bathed in pale moonlight with shapes of death emerging from beyond. She saw Ned Stark standing against them, his flaming sword lighting the night. She saw Robb crowned in frost, leading armies of men, beasts, and perhaps even other creatures allied by necessity. She saw dragons overhead, or believed she did, and a swirl of magic not seen in thousands of years. When she emerged, pale and trembling, she would only say, "The flames burn bright, but the shadows grow longer. We must be ready." On a cold dawn, Robb and Ned walked along Harrenhal's walls, gazing at the horizon. "We should call the northern banners home," Robb mused. "Gather them at Moat Cailin, or even Winterfell if we can retake it from the Ironborn. Then turn all our might northward to face this threat. We can make peace with some southern houses, or let them fight among themselves if they will not listen. The realm is near to collapse anyway. Let them see sense or die." Ned considered. "Winterfell, my heart aches to see it again. But the war is not yet won, and the Lannisters, though wounded, will not remain idle. Cersei will see to that. And the Freys hold the twins. Crossing into the north might be a challenge." Robb felt a flicker of anger at the mention of the Freys, for the memory of their betrayal still cut deep. "Then we take the twins by force if we must. Or find some other route. We cannot remain here at Harrenhal forever." Ned nodded, brow furrowed. "Agreed. Let us prepare. Summon our allies. We will push north with all who will join us. And if the realm tries to stop us, we will show them the fire in our hearts." Father and son stood together, gazing into a future as uncertain as any they had ever faced. But together, they represented an unbreakable bond of legacy and rebirth, a Robb Stark who had defied the might of the Iron Throne, and Ned Stark who had crossed the threshold of death and returned, burning with new purpose. The North had known many legends, the Kings of Winter, the brave Rangers of the Night's Watch, the old magic of the Weirwoods. Now it had a new legend, whispered in both fear and reverence, the fiery wolf of Winterfell, resurrected by the Red Woman's rites, standing beside his son, the King in the North. On that brittle dawn, the wind carried the faint tang of ice and flame. In the distance, crows wheeled above the battlefield's dead, while beyond the edges of men's vision, a darker threat stirred. Yet hope also flickered, banked by sacrifice. In time, songs would be sung of the day Ned Stark rose from the pyre, of the moment Tywin Lannister fell under a blade wreathed in fire, of the reforging of House Stark's power. The men who witnessed it would swear that in those moments, the old gods of the North and the Lord of Light cast aside their ancient hostilities to unite in one cause, preserving the realm from the chilling doom that crept forth from the land of always winter. Robb Stark could not know how all the pieces would fall. But when he locked eyes with his father, whose gaze, though touched by emberglow, still held the steady, calm devotion to family that Robb remembered, he felt certain of one thing: the wolves of Winterfell were together again, even in the midst of a broken realm. They would press onward, father and son, shaping the destiny of the North in steel and flame. And with every step they took beneath Harrenhal's melted towers, they walked deeper into a new age, one of returning magic, gathering shadows, and the abiding truth that, in the end, the night is dark and full of terrors. But the fire of a united North might yet hold it at bay. On that brittle dawn, as the echoes of triumph still hung in Harrenhal's mist-shrouded courtyard, Ned Stark slowly rose from the bench where he'd been resting. The pain in his shoulder from Tywin's final blow had receded to a dull ache, and he tested his bandaged arm as he crossed the uneven stones. There was a warmth inside him, unlike any wound fever he'd ever felt, an undercurrent of life that smoldered in his very blood. He felt it even in the crisp air, as though the world around him were colder than it used to be and he himself had become some ember. Robb was waiting at the edge of the courtyard, gray wind at his side. Father and son exchanged a glance of mutual understanding, no words needed. The realm had changed in the space of a few weeks. The Lannister war machine had lost its leader. Tywin's death was a thunderclap that rang from the walls of King's Landing to every outpost in the Westerlands. The Starks, once crippled by betrayal and the beheading of their lord, now stood stronger than ever, led by two wolves, the king in the north who had proven his cunning on the battlefield and the resurrected Eddard Stark, a living legend wreathed in a subtle aura of sorcery and flame. Even so, victory seemed a fragile thing. King Joffrey still held the Iron Throne, buttressed by the remaining Lannisters, the power of King's Landing, and the uncertain alliances of the Tyrells. Roose Bolton still lurked in the shadows, though none knew whether he would attempt to broker terms with the Iron Throne or pursue his own advantage. The phrase, outraged by the fall of Tywin and terrified by the rumors of Ned Stark's return, hunkered at the twins, uncertain whether to parley or bar their gates. And there was the matter of the Ironborn in the north, as well as the uncertain fate of Sansa, Arya, and the younger Stark boys. The war raged on many fronts. The realm seemed to splinter further each day while winter's shadow pressed in from the distant edges of civilization. That morning, Robb had summoned a gathering of his lords in what remained of Harrenhal's lesser hall. The monstrous fortress had many halls, but so many were ruined, scorched, or simply unsafe. Smoke-stained banners of defeated foes had been piled in one corner, some showing the flayed man of Bolton, others the Lion of Lannister. Torches flickered along the walls, revealing old scorch marks and melted stone arches overhead. At the long table, men of the North and Riverlands assembled, the great Jon, who still wore the drying blood of his enemies on his furs, Lady Meage Mormont, grim and practical. Lord Karstark's cousin, who had assumed the name and seat after Rickard Karstark's execution, the Blackfish, Brynden Tully, newly arrived from Riverrun with a few loyal men. Catelyn Stark sat near her husband, watchful and quiet. Melisandre was not given a seat at the table, but she stood close enough to observe, the red of her gown a vivid stain in the gloom. The men eyed her warily, some with hostility, others with reluctant respect, for they had all witnessed her power on the day she resurrected Ned Stark. On that day, she had become impossible to dismiss as mere trickery. The Lord of Light was real to them, at least in some undeniable measure. Robb leaned forward, both hands braced on the table. "My lords, we have achieved a great victory. Tywin Lannister is slain, and his host is scattered. The Lannisters will not move as boldly without their patriarch. Word from King's Landing suggests chaos. King Joffrey still sits the throne, but the Goldcloaks are restless, and Queen Cersei scrambles to maintain control. The city starves, they say, or soon will, and the Tyrells see their chance to seize influence at court. There is opportunity here for us, but also danger. A cornered lion is most vicious." Great Jon Umber let out a booming laugh. "Ha! Let the lion snarl. We slew their greatest. Now we should push forward. Take the fight to King's Landing itself. Be done with this." "Easier said than done," Brynden Tully cautioned, his expression as stony as ever. "The Lannisters still have men enough, as do their allies. They hold King's Landing, which is not so easy to breach. And though their discipline might falter, they'll fight like devils if cornered. Storming that city is no small feat." Meage Mormont nodded. "We also have Walder Frey to contend with. The twins block our route north. If we aim to cross the river, we either need to force the twins or find an alternative. And we have other enemies. The Ironborn still plague the northern coast, and we have no idea what the Boltons are plotting." Catelyn glanced at Ned. I would see Riverrun freed of siege before we attempt any march south. But I fear for the north. Winterfell is our home. Reports are contradictory. Theon Greyjoy took it, supposedly killed my sons, then lost it to the bastard of Bolton. There are rumors that Bran and Rickon might still live, wandering the countryside. So many tales, we know not which to believe. Ned's eyes flickered with an inner glow, a subtle reflection of the torchlight or else something deeper. We cannot abandon Winterfell. We must reclaim it if we are to hold the North's loyalty. And if our younger sons still draw breath. He trailed off, the sorrow in his voice deepening. A hush fell over the table. The lords shifted in their chairs. Many had known Bran and Rickon. To think them murdered or lost cut deep. Yet none dared interrupt Eddard Stark, whose presence was both comforting and unsettling. He continued, "Tywin's death changes everything," Ned said. "But it does not end the war. Our foes will scramble like cornered rats. Cersei and Joffrey remain in King's Landing, too dangerous to ignore. The Freys will want to secure their position. Roose Bolton once held Harrenhal in King Joffrey's name. We must discover his stance. The Ironborn are entrenched in northern strongholds. There is another factor. Winter is near. We stand on the brink of a threat beyond all mortal quarrels. The White Walkers stir in the far north. The realm may soon face horrors it has not seen in thousands of years." Many men around the table looked away, uneasy, for the talk of others seemed distant legend to them, overshadowed by the tangible threats of the war. Great John exhaled loudly. "We've heard the tales, my lord, but we have immediate foes. If we're to tackle them all, we need a plan that won't shatter our forces." Robb nodded. "Here is what I propose. We hold Harrenhal for now, building on our advantage in the Riverlands. We dispatch a strong contingent to relieve Riverrun and secure the region. Another host will push north, retake the Twins by negotiation if possible or by force if not. Once we control the crossing, we can move deeper into the north, see about reclaiming Winterfell and driving out any Ironborn still skulking there. With Winterfell in our hands, the North can unite behind us again, and perhaps we can then turn our full attention to forging alliances against the White Walkers. If the Lannisters dare meet us in open battle again, we'll face them from a position of strength." Brynden Tully inclined his head. "Riverrun can hold for a while longer, but Edmure is weary and the Freys have stung us more than once. If we try to force the Twins, the crossing might cost us dear. But I see no better course. Meej Mormont-eyed Robb. Who will lead the host north and who remains here at Harrenhal?" Robb glanced at his father. "I will lead the main strength north to secure the Twins and then Winterfell. My father will remain here at Harrenhal with a garrison to command the Riverlands in my absence, support the relief of Riverrun, and hold any Lannister advance in check. Once we have the Twins in hand, I can send word for you to join me, father, if it's wise to move on Winterfell together." That spurred a wave of murmuring around the table. The men understood the logic. Robb was the king in the north, younger and more mobile, while Ned's renewed presence lent authority but required caution. His injuries and that uncanny fire might not fare well in forced marches. Furthermore, if Ned Stark remained at Harrenhal, the men of the Riverlands would be bolstered by his legendary name. Their enemies might hesitate to assault a fortress rumored to be held by a man who had cheated the headsman's axe. Ned studied Robb a moment, then nodded. "I'll do my part so long as my presence does not hamper the cause. Be wary of Walder Frey. He is cunning and he bears grudges. The crossing is vital to us, but if he closes it off, you'll be forced to find another route or waste precious time." The Great John snorted. "If that old weasel locks the gates, we'll break them down." Melisandre's voice, soft and smooth, drifted through the room. "Use caution in all things. The blood of House Frey flows in many branches. One might treat with you, another betray you. Fire has shown me the image of a bridge stained red blood in the water beneath stony arches. Take from that what you will." Several men shifted uneasily. They disliked her pronouncements, half prophecy and half riddle, but none dared scoff at her openly anymore. Even so, Ned shot her a tight look as if to contain any further ominous statements that might distract the lords from practical matters. Robb pressed on. "Then it's decided. We'll gather supplies here, reorganize our forces, then split. The Great John, Lord Karstark, and Meej Mormont will join me in the march north. The Blackfish and my father will command Harrenhal, coordinate with the River Lords, and keep watch on any Lannister movements. My mother, if she wills, can remain with father or accompany me. I leave that choice to her." Catelyn closed her eyes for a moment, then said quietly, "I will remain here. My place is at Ned's side now, and I must see if there's any word of the girls. Perhaps we can negotiate a release if Sansa is still in King's Landing. We have need of calm heads here to correspond with any who might seek alliance or parley. But I ask you to bring our father's bones, your father's rightful bones, back to Riverrun if they remain in these dungeons, so the Tullus can be at peace." A faint, wry smile tugged at Ned's lips. "Catelyn, my bones are in me, though changed, and I walk these halls. But as for your father's bones, Hoster Tully was laid to rest properly at Riverrun's funeral boat upon the river. We must see to your mother's remains and the rest of your kin in time." Catelyn flushed, realizing she'd misspoken in her emotion. She meant the remains of her ancestors, not Ned's own scattered bones, once in these cursed depths. The entire situation of Eddard's bones had become impossibly strange. She only nodded softly. Then the lords rose, the council concluding with the understanding that they had a plan of war. Over the following days, Harrenhal bustled with activity. The battered gates were repaired as best they could be. Captured Lannister and Frey arms were sorted. Provisions for the upcoming march north were assembled. Ravaged farmland around the fortress provided scant sustenance, so riders ventured farther into the riverlands, foraging or negotiating with local lordlings. Meanwhile, news trickled in from the wider realm, courtesy of traveling merchants or frightened peasants. King's Landing was on edge, the Tyrells growing bold. Stannis Baratheon still brooded at Dragonstone, diminished in strength since the defeat on the Blackwater, but hardly inactive. Some said he was mustering ships once more. Others whispered of an even darker rumor that Stannis had lost his Red Woman and with her, much of his so-called sorcery. For Robb, the days raced by in a whirl of preparations. He visited the wounded, oversaw the forging of new spears, and wrote dispatches to lords from the Vale to White Harbor, all in the hope of gathering allies. Grey Wind stalked at his side, a comforting presence. But late each evening, he found a moment to sit with Ned in a dim corridor or by a small hearth in one of the salvageable halls. Their father and son spoke in hushed tones about the burdens of leadership, the uncertain future, and the rift between life and death that Ned still felt tugging at him. "It is as though I stand with one foot in the crypts beneath Winterfell and one foot in the warmth of day," Ned said one night regarding the flames in the hearth. "Part of me yearns for rest, for the quiet of death. Another part burns with a need to set things right. For you, for your brothers and sisters, for the North. I did not ask for this second life, Robb, but I will not squander it." Robb placed a hand on his father's. He felt the heat beneath Ned's skin, as though the embers within him glowed at every heartbeat. "Father, I'm grateful you're here. I sometimes feel lost in this war, as though every step forward only reveals more pitfalls. Having you here to guide me, it gives me hope." Ned gave a small smile, lines of weariness bracketed around his eyes. "I will do my best. The old gods know I have made mistakes before. This time, perhaps I can avoid them." He paused, glancing sidelong at the hall's archway, where a swirl of crimson cloth signaled Melisandre's passing. "Yet I cannot say if this power that brought me back is wholly a blessing." Robb felt a pang of unease. "We will be cautious. Melisandre might serve a purpose, but her ways are not ours. We owe her for what she did, and I do not regret that, Father, but she is not our master." Ned nodded, returning his gaze to the fire. "No, we Starks have served no master but duty and honor. We have to keep ourselves intact." Soon the day of departure arrived. Horns sounded in the courtyard at first light. Squires rushed about, saddling horses and strapping bedrolls to pack mules. Great John Umber's laughter boomed from somewhere near the gates, where he rallied a group of spearmen. Lady Mormont's fighters, lean and fierce, prepared for the long march north. Lord Karstark's cousin led a contingent as well, though a shadow lingered over them, memories of the old Karstark's execution. They followed Robb still, but a certain grim tension shrouded them. Robb embraced Ned in the courtyard. Each wore a thick cloak against the cold, though Ned's complexion hinted he barely felt it. All around them, Harrenhal's black towers jutted like melted talons into a pale sky. "Farewell, Father," Robb said quietly. "I'll send ravens if Walder Frey proves treacherous. I expect no easy path, but we'll find a way. Once the crossing is ours, we'll strike for Winterfell." Keep yourself safe here." Ned rested his uninjured hand on Robb's shoulder. "And you, my son, if the Freys resist, do not let your anger blind you. We can ill afford more bloody feuds among houses if we hope to face the greater darkness. But if Walder Frey cannot be reasoned with—" His voice trailed off, and the flame in his eyes glinted. "We cannot let him block our road." Robb nodded. "Agreed." Catelyn hugged her son fiercely, eyes wet. "May the gods be with you. Bring justice to the north. Bring hope to Winterfell. I wish I could be there when you set foot in our home again." Robb held her gently, mindful of the chain of sorrow that wound through them all. "I promise I'll send word. Perhaps soon we'll all stand in the great hall of Winterfell again." Then he mounted his warhorse, Grey Wind loping alongside. His assembled army began to file out the gates. Ned and Catelyn watched as they crossed the drawbridge, banners rippling in the cold breeze. The direwolf sigil of House Stark dominated the host, interspersed with the sunburst of Karstark, the Bear of Mormont, and the roaring Umber on a field, ragged but proud. Melisandre stood on the battlements, her red hair whipping across her face. She gazed after the departing host, lips moving in a silent incantation or prayer. Whether for success or some more mysterious aim, no one could say. Within a few hours, the clamor of marching men receded into the distance, swallowed by the Riverland's rolling plains and thick woodlands. Harrenhal, with Ned Stark and Catelyn Stark at its core, fell into an uneasy stillness, the hush broken only by the caw of crows and the labor of men reinforcing the ramparts. Brynden Tully commandeered a portion of the garrison for an expedition toward Riverrun, hoping to lift the Frey siege or at least distract them. The Blackfish vowed to harass the enemy lines relentlessly, emboldened by Ned's presence as a threat in the heart of the Riverlands. In the weeks that followed, Ned found himself walking Harrenhal's silent corridors often as though searching for something he could not name. The fortress seemed to groan with old ghosts, the curses of Harren the Black etched into every melted archway and scorched chamber. Late at night, he'd stand on a balcony high above the courtyard, looking across the plains, imagining where Robb and his host marched. He worried for his son, but had no doubt in Robb's abilities. The boy had become a man too quickly, hammered into shape by war. Sometimes Ned joined Melisandre at the large hearth in the great hall where she stoked towering flames and muttered her prayers. He was wary of her, never forgetting the price she had demanded, a living sacrifice for his resurrection. Yet she was also the one person who understood the fire stirring in his veins. When the pain in his shoulder flared and a strange heat pulsed around the wound, it was she who cooled it with spiced wine and whispered incantations. He asked her once, in a low voice, "Why do I still feel torn, as though half of me belongs elsewhere?" She looked at him, her red eyes gleaming with an uncanny light. "You crossed the boundary between life and death, my lord. Few return from that realm, even fewer with clarity of mind. Your soul is tethered by the power of the Red God. Perhaps a piece of you still lingers in the shadows. Perhaps the old gods lay claim to you as well, for you were theirs first. It is a conflict of faiths, a tension that may never fully leave you." Ned said nothing, glancing at the flames that licked the hearthstones. Firelight danced on the edges of his sword, set carefully by the wall. He wondered if the old gods still knew him at all. Outside Harrenhal's gates, the realm churned with fresh strife. Brynden Tully's raiding parties struck at Frey supply lines, harrying them enough that word reached Harrenhal of potential cracks in Walder Frey's resolve. Some rumored that half the Freys wanted peace, half thirsted for vengeance. Walder Frey was aging, more spiteful than ever, and outraged that the Northmen had not come pleading for his goodwill. At King's Landing, the rumors were even more chilling. Joffrey had grown more erratic, if that were possible, lashing out at courtiers and turning on the remnants of the Lannister faction in fear. Without Tywin's iron hand, the city trembled. Varys, the master of whisperers, was said to be at odds with Cersei. The Tyrells pressed for Margaery's marriage to Joffrey, hoping to secure their alliance in a more permanent fashion. Riots in Flea Bottom flared each time the city's food stores dwindled. Over it all, a new rumor circulated that Ned Stark had been resurrected and had personally slain Tywin Lannister. Some claimed Ned was a demon of the north, possessed by ancient magic. Others insisted it was all a false rumor to sow fear, but fear it certainly sowed. Meanwhile, across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen's name appeared in scattered talk, though it was overshadowed by the local chaos. None could confirm if she truly had dragons or how many. As for Stannis, some said he now consulted with new mystics, others that he had retreated in gloom, cursing the day he lost Melisandre. None of it meant relief for Ned. All it meant was the realm reeled from one crisis to the next. At last, a raven came from Robb. Harrenhal's rookery was one of the few parts of the castle maintained properly by the household staff who had survived. Ned and Catelyn read the note together by a single flickering candle. Robb had advanced near the twins, discovering Frey patrols drawn up on the southern bank. There had been brief skirmishes, neither side gaining much ground. Lord Walder refused to grant them safe passage. A short, terse message had arrived from the twins. Unless Robb reinstated certain betrothals and offered large concessions, the crossing would remain closed. Ned felt a twist in his gut. The memory of the broken betrothal. Robb had once promised to marry a Frey girl, then married Jane Westerling, or in some versions, T. Elisa if one follows the show's storyline, but here let's keep it to the book lore approach with Jane, instead still hung over them like a black cloud. In the original timeline, that had been the impetus for Walder's betrayal at the twins. But now, things had gone differently. The Red Wedding had not occurred, or at least not in the same fashion. They'd never come under Walder's roof. They'd seized Harrenhal instead of relying on Frey hospitality. Still, Walder's rancor was well known, and no one believed the old man's wounded pride would be easily mollified. Yet Robb refused to yield to those demands. Another letter described how Robb had established a camp south of the river, setting up siege lines in case the Freys would not negotiate. The Great John, impatient for battle, argued for storming the twins. Others, more prudent, feared the heavy cost of breaching those formidable twin keeps. They had not the resources or siege equipment to do it quickly, and winter threatened to bring storms. So far, a stalemate. Robb wrote that if the standoff continued, it could ruin their plans to push on to Winterfell in time to reclaim it from the Ironborn. In reply, Ned penned a careful letter to Walder Frey, invoking old ties from when Ned had been Lord of Winterfell and reminding him of the threats that faced the entire realm. He urged Walder Frey to recall that House Stark had not broken faith with him lightly and that the real enemy lay in the Lannisters' tyranny and the looming horrors of the Long Night. Ned sealed the letter with the dire wolf sigil and sent it off by raven, uncertain if it would do any good. A day later, a second raven from Robb described negotiations at a standstill. Tensions grew. More skirmishes flared near the fords. The Great John wanted to assault the twins outright. Robb wanted to avoid that if at all possible, but time slipped away. The roads would soon become impassable with snow and ice. In the gloom of Harrenhal, Ned paced like a caged wolf. He wanted to ride north and join Robb. But his wounded shoulder, not fully healed, still troubled him, and the men in the fortress needed his leadership. Brynden Tully can hold the Riverlands, Ned muttered to Catelyn one night. I have no taste for sitting idle while Robb faces Walder Frey's obstinacy alone. Catelyn understood his frustration but laid a hand on his uninjured arm. You must be patient. Robb is strong and has proven his command. You have a role here securing the Riverlands, ensuring the Lannisters do not mount a counterattack. We can't be sure that Cersei isn't amassing a new host. She might send Jaime Lannister to rally the West. Ned exhaled. I pray that Walder Frey sees reason. Or that our men find a swifter route. The North needs us, Cat. A few mornings later, a small party of men rode into Harrenhal under a white flag. They were Riverlanders, battered and hungry-looking, escorted by Brynden Tully's riders. Among them was a lean, wiry man wearing patched armor and a threadbare cloak. The men in the yard whispered in surprise, for they recognized the device on the man's worn surcoat, a forked lightning bolt. He was a member of the Brotherhood without banners. They were brought to Ned in the half-ruined hall. Ned regarded them keenly, aware that the Brotherhood was said to be led by Beric Dondarrion, a man rumored to have been resurrected by Thoros of Myr multiple times. Beric had once served King Robert, and many called him the true champion of the small folk in the Riverlands, striking against Lannister raiders. Yet they had also stolen from lords, even from those technically allied with the Starks. The wiry man introduced himself as Tom Sevenstreams. My Lord Stark, he said, bowing with a roguish half-grin. An honor. Our leader, Lord Beric, bade me carry a message if we could pass your lines without being shot. We have no quarrel with the Starks, never did. Our quarrel was with those who brought war to these lands. The rumor of your return has spread among the small folk. Many see it as a sign that justice yet lives. Ned studied Tom's face. I know Beric was loyal to King Robert. I know he fights to protect the small folk from roving brigands. But we have heard conflicting tales. Some say the Brotherhood also robs travelers indiscriminately. Tom pressed a hand to his heart. My lord, the Brotherhood lives off the land, that's true. Yet we try not to harm the innocent. We take from those who can spare it and give to those in need. No doubt some are less scrupulous than others, war is harsh. But we've found that justice in these times is rare. Lord Beric, like you, was once touched by death and returned. He knows the shape of the darkness that creeps upon us. Ned's pulse quickened. Beric was resurrected by the Red God as well, if the tales are true. I would speak with him if he's near. Tom nodded. He would speak with you as well, my lord. That's why I've come. We camp not far from here, in a hidden dell. If you would parley with him, we can arrange a safe meeting. We have no interest in fighting Starks. Our only enemies are those who prey on the weak. Ned glanced at Catelyn, who stood beside him, tension in her posture. He had heard rumors of Beric's repeated deaths at the hands of the Mountain and others, how Thuras had breathed life into him each time. Now, Ned himself carried Loloress fire within. Perhaps there was a kinship. Melisandre in the background said nothing, but Ned sensed her awareness. Very well, he said. We will come to meet Beric, but we'll bring a contingent for safety. We live in dangerous times, and trusting any party blindly is unwise. Tom bowed with a slight flourish. Agreed. We want no trouble. 2 days later, Ned and a small guard of 30 men rode out beyond Harrenhal's walls. Catelyn insisted on staying behind, refusing to let both Starks risk ambush at once. Melisandre joined Ned's party, along with a few trusted knights and half a dozen archers. The morning sky was dull, a pale wintry haze promising snowfall soon. The air smelled of damp earth and rot. They ventured along a muddy track that wound between bare-branched oaks and tall pines, guided by Tom's 7 streams. At times, Ned's men cast suspicious looks at Tom, but the minstrel-like figure only plucked idly at a lute slung on his back, as though unconcerned by the armed presence behind him. Melisandre rode near Ned, her scarlet cloak catching stray beams of pallid sunlight when they broke through the canopy. After an hour's ride, they approached a secluded clearing. There, in the lee of a rocky outcrop, a ragged encampment sprawled. Tents made of patched canvas and old sailcloth lined a cold fire pit. Ned glimpsed men and women in peasant clothing, some bearing weapons, others nursing injuries. The insignias varied. Some wore threadbare uniforms from houses in the Westerlands, others from the Riverlands, and more still from the Stormlands. They were united only by the Brotherhood's shared cause. A figure stepped from a tent, tall and gaunt, with a ragged patch over one eye. A battered breastplate covered his lean torso. The man's face was a map of scars. He walked with a careful, almost deliberate gait, as if each step reminded him of old pain. Behind him stood a red-bearded priest in travel-stained robes. Thuras of Myr, if the rumors held true. Lord Stark, the gaunt man said, inclining his head. I am Beric Dondarrion. I served King Robert once upon a time. I have died many times in the Riverland's defense, and yet here I stand. He lifted his chin, revealing a thick scar around his neck, evidence of a hanging or a blade. Welcome. We are not your foes. Ned dismounted, motioning for his men to hold back. He approached Beric with calm dignity, aware of the eyes upon him. You have my respect, Lord Beric. I knew you only by rumor in King's Landing, and from the days of your mission to bring the Mountain to justice. It seems you, too, have known the touch of the Red God. Beric's single eye flicked to Melisandre, who observed silently. Aye, Thuras has brought me back 6 times. Each time I lose a bit of myself. But it's better than leaving the small folk to be ravaged by brigands. We've done what we can to protect them. War has turned these lands into a graveyard of hopes. Ned exhaled softly, feeling the weight of that statement. We fight for the North, for our families, but also for the realm. The Lannisters' cruelty has fueled the chaos. Now winter looms. We'll need every sword if the White Walkers truly come. Beric's expression was somber. I have fought whites once, many months ago, near the God's Eye. A small number, but enough to know they're real. Thuras's prayers burned them, but they came at us like unstoppable corpses. I fear that was only a taste. Melisandre spoke then, her voice low and firm. The Great Other gathers strength. Only the Lord of Light stands in its path. You and Lord Stark both have been touched by Lawler. That cannot be mere chance. Thuras, the red-bearded priest, offered a half-smile. You're of the same faith, I see. From Essos? Melisandre acknowledged him with a level stare. I am Melisandre of Ashai, yes. In service to the Lord of Light, though I have walked among these Westerosi for some time. Beric's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, an old, chipped blade that showed signs of frequent repair. We share the same cause in broad strokes. We want an end to the war that ravages the Riverlands, and we want the realm defended against the darkness beyond. Lord Stark, if you and your kingly son can bring stability, truly, not just by trading one oppressor for another, then perhaps we can find common purpose. But we've seen so many lords claiming righteousness only to butcher peasants at the next turning. Why should we trust you? Ned met Beric's gaze without flinching. I do not ask for blind trust. I can only say that House Stark has stood for justice in the North since the days of the First Men. I was executed in King's Landing because I would not bow to lies. My son wages war partly to avenge that injustice, but also to protect the North from the Lannisters and the Freys. We do not seek to subjugate the small folk here. We have no interest in pillaging or tyranny. If we can secure peace, we will. Beric studied him a moment. Perhaps you mean that truly. And yet war rarely grants such neat endings. Thoros stepped forward. We can help each other. The Brotherhood has eyes and ears all over the Riverlands. We know the hidden paths, the condition of villages, the movement of outlaws. If your men remain, we can coordinate, prevent further devastation. But we want some protection in return. If there comes a day you stand victorious in the Riverlands, do not hunt us as brigands. Ned inclined his head. If your actions remain honorable, you'll have no reason to fear. We will not punish those who defend the common folk so long as they don't turn to banditry against innocents. Beric nodded slowly. Then we have an accord of sorts. Will you share anything that might help us avoid crossing paths with your men or battling them by mistake? We've no wish to fight Starks. Ned agreed, and so the two parties spent an hour discussing safe routes, likely patrol zones, and places the Brotherhood might shelter refugees. Thoros passed along. Tidings gleaned from travelers, tales of Frey movements and small Lannister bands still raiding to the west. It was precarious, but at least for now it seemed the Brotherhood and the Starks could coexist in the war-torn Riverlands without open conflict. Before parting, Ned hesitated, then turned to Beric again. We share more than a desire for justice, Lord Beric. We share the Red God's power, though I did not ask for mine. You say each time you return, you lose a piece of yourself. How do you remain who you are? Beric's expression turned grave, almost pitying. Truly, my lord, I'm not the man I was. I've forgotten large parts of my former life. The face of my betrothed is a blur. The castle I once called home is a memory that slips away like a dream. Only the mission remains, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, to do what's just. That is what I cling to. A purpose is all that keeps me tethered. Ned felt a chill course through him, despite the warmth in his blood. His own memories were intact, more or less, but Beric's warning resonated. Was that his eventual fate, pieces of his mind and spirit flaking away each time he tapped into the flame? He thought of the day he unleashed fire upon Tywin Lannister, how raw and consuming it had felt. Thank you for your honesty, he said quietly. I will remember it. They rode back to Harrenhal as dusk fell, uncertain whether to take comfort or despair from Beric's example. The synergy with the Brotherhood was a small relief. They might gain helpful scouts in these lands. Yet the conversation about repeated resurrection weighed on Ned's heart. The next morning, a raven arrived bearing a letter from Walder Frey himself, addressed to Ned Stark. The text was a torrent of offended pride and veiled insults. Walder demanded that Robb fulfill the original betrothal promise made in good faith. He also demanded recompense for slights done to his house, including the trespass of Ned's men on Frey-held land. The letter ended by suggesting that if these conditions were not met, the twins would remain barred and any attempt to force the crossing would be met with unfortunate bloodshed. Ned read the letter with a grimace. He shared it with Catelyn and Melisandre. Catelyn muttered as expected. Walder will never forget or forgive a perceived slight, but we cannot let him extort us. Robb has already broken that betrothal. He's wed to Jane Westerling, and we cannot simply cast her aside for a Frey bride. Ned dipped the quill in ink and considered. We can offer other forms of alliance. Perhaps a marriage alliance with another Stark relative, though we have few left. Or a portion of gold from Lannister spoils. Something to placate his pride. But will he accept? Catelyn's mouth pressed into a thin line. He might. Or he might drag this out until the cold snows choke the roads and trap our men in a siege. Walder is cunning. He can keep negotiations going forever if it suits him, meanwhile wearing down Robb's host. Melisandre's voice slid into the conversation like silk. Blood demands blood. The old man will not easily yield. The flames show me crossing water under a red sky. You must be prepared to shed blood if negotiations fail. Ned scowled, but he could not deny the possibility. He'd seen enough of Walder Frey's treachery to guess that a peaceful solution might be beyond reach. Still, he penned a careful response, offering gold, the possibility of a strategic alliance through distant cousins, and the promise that House Frey's role would be recognized after the war. He ended by cautioning that if Walder's obstinacy blocked the North's rightful path to defend their homeland, the blame for any conflict would lie squarely on House Frey. He sent the Raven, though his heart told him it might be in vain. Over the next 2 weeks, tidings from Robb were full of frustration. Lord Walder's last letter had proposed a meeting at the water's edge to discuss terms, but on the appointed day no Frey came. Instead, a hail of crossbow bolts from the fortress walls greeted Robb's envoys, killing 2 of his men. Furious, Robb had begun constructing makeshift siege works. Some of the lords advised building rafts or capturing smaller fords upstream, but the geography gave the Freys a strong defensive advantage. All the while, winter crept closer. Frost silvered the morning grass. At night, the wind howled across the vast courtyard of Harrenhal, stirring old ashes. Some men claimed to see shapes moving along the fortress's parapets, ghosts or worse. Ned often dreamed of the crypts beneath Winterfell, hearing the voices of dead kings of winter urging him home. At last, Ned could bear it no more. The nights brought him little rest. The gloom of Harrenhal weighed on him, and each new message from Robb spoke of deadlock. "I will go north," he told Catelyn and Melisandre one morning, roused by a restless urgency in his blood. "Brynden Tully can manage the garrison. We will leave behind enough men to hold Harrenhal against any Lannister attempt. But I must be with my son. My place is there, not lingering in this cursed fortress." Catelyn looked at him with mingled concern and resignation. "You're set on this?" "I am. My shoulder heals well enough now. I can ride. The realm cannot afford for us to remain divided." Catelyn pressed her lips together, then nodded. "Very well. I will come with you. The men might see it as an omen, if both Starks leave Harrenhal, but I trust the Blackfish to stand firm." She paused, glancing at Melisandre. "And you?" Melisandre's expression was calm, as though she'd foreseen this. "I ride where the fiery wolf goes. The flames still guide me to the heart of the battles to come." Ned accepted that stoically. Part of him bristled at the Red Woman's constant presence. He had never needed a sorceress at his side before, but in the days since his resurrection, he had learned that resisting certain aspects of that power only brought him searing aches and feverish dreams. Like it or not, the flame was part of him now, and Melisandre alone knew its nature. Within a day, Ned's column was assembled. 300 horse, 1,000 foot, enough to provide protection for a journey north. They left Harrenhal's black gates behind at first light, snowflakes drifting in the gray sky. Brynden Tully shook Ned's hand and promised to hold the fortress. "With Tywin dead, the Lannisters may not press so soon, but will stay vigilant." Ned and Catelyn led the column up the main river road. The journey felt both familiar and strange. So many times he had traveled the Riverlands, yet never under these circumstances. Villages they passed were half-burned or abandoned. Some peasants crawled from hovels to stare wide-eyed as the Stark banner fluttered by, the rumor of Ned's rebirth sending them scurrying in awe or fright. Melisandre rode near the front, scarlet cloak a stark contrast to the drab winter landscape. The men kept their distance from her, many still unsettled by the shadow of her power. After a week on the road, the column drew near to the Twins. Snowy fields spread out around the great fortress bridge that spanned the green fork of the Trident. 2 identical keeps, squat and formidable, rose on either bank of the wide, rushing river. Within bowshot on the southern shore, Robb's camp sprawled, a cluster of tents surrounded by earthen ramparts. Smoke from cookfires curled into the bleak sky. Robb's outriders spotted Ned's approach, heralding them with blasts of the war horn. Soon, Robb himself appeared, riding out with the Great John and a handful of bannermen. His expression when he saw Ned and Catelyn was a mix of relief and frustration. "Father, Mother," he said, reining in his mount. Grey Wind stood at his side, hackles raised as if the tension of the siege had set him on edge. Catelyn urged her horse forward to embrace her son, mindful of the watchers around them. "Robb, we came as soon as we could." Robb's eyes flicked to Melisandre, then back to Ned. "I'm glad you did. Walder Frey plays his games, but we cannot break him easily. We've tried smaller fords upstream, guarded or blocked. Attempted negotiations he answers with insults or crossbow bolts. We can build siege towers, but the crossing is well defended. They rode together into Robb's camp where Ned dismounted and surveyed the scene. Men huddled around fires, their breath white in the cold air. Piles of roughage. Hewn planks suggested Robb's forces had tried to construct rafts or siege engines. The Great John stomped over, offering Ned a respectful nod. Lord Stark, if we had better weapons of war, we could try a direct assault. But the twins are formidable, and winter's close. We lose men to chills and exposure by the day. Ned frowned, scanning the fortress across the river. The towers loomed, arrow slits bristling with watchers. Have you tried sending a raven to Walder Frey, proposing new terms? Robb's mouth twisted. I have 3 times. No reply, or worse, a mockery. At that moment, a single crossbow bolt arced from the battlements and landed harmlessly in the water far short of their position. A jeer went up from the Frey side, carried by the wind. Robb's men cursed in response, but no one wasted a shot at that distance. Ned's jaw tightened. I will write Walder one final time under my own hand. I'll offer him the chance to parley at a neutral location between our lines. If he refuses, we have no choice but to break this stalemate. Robb exhaled, looking worn. I know, but the assault will be costly. A thoughtful hush settled. Then Melisandre spoke, her words cutting through the gloom. There may be other ways to breach a fortress besides siege towers or stealth. A sudden wariness flickered in Robb's eyes. You speak of sorcery? She gave him that measured half-smile. Fire can do many things, if properly unleashed. The Great John spat on the frosty ground. I don't trust black magic, my lord. We can fight like honest men. Ned held up a hand, forestalling argument. We will not slaughter innocents or do anything monstrous. Let me see if Walder will parley. If not, then we consider all options. But rest assured, I will not permit a repeat of the horrors I've heard attributed to some shadow spawn. Melisandre's expression remained calm. As you wish, my lord. But the time may come when you must choose between the lesser evil of using fire and the greater evil of letting countless men die in fruitless assaults. That evening, inside Robb's command tent, Ned penned a letter to Walder Frey. He chose plain but firm language, invoking their blood ties through House Tully and the need to unite against the southern threat. If Walder would not yield the crossing, Ned warned, House Stark would be forced to take it. He sealed the letter with wax and entrusted it to a rider under a banner of truce, who carried it across the wide field toward the twins' southern gatehouse. The next morning, the rider returned, flanked by 2 Frey men-at-arms who escorted him at spear point. They deposited the rider near Robb's lines and galloped back to the fortress without a word. The rider had a piece of parchment pinned to his surcoat by a dagger. When Ned pulled it loose, he found a short message scrawled in a shaky hand. You come to take what is mine, so come and die. Walder Frey. A hush fell over the officers gathered around. The Great John let out a curse, clenching his fists. Robb looked pale with anger. Ned's voice was cold. So be it. We'll offer him no more courtesy. They convened a council in Robb's command tent. The Great John urged an immediate assault with rafts and scaling ladders, while Karstark's cousin advised waiting for heavy siege equipment. Meej Mormont proposed constructing a floating bridge upstream. Others pointed out that the land's contour gave the Freys vantage points for archers. Each plan carried dire risk. Amid the heated debate, Melisandre stepped forward, her voice unwavering. In the darkness of Harrenhal, I saw a vision, a fortress straddling a great river, wreathed in flame. The waters boiled. Then the fortress gates swung wide. Perhaps this is the path Lawler intends. The men stared at her, uneasy. Robb said, we do not have pitch enough to set the twins ablaze, if that's your meaning. Nor do we want to slaughter everyone inside. There are innocents there, women, children. Melisandre's gaze shifted to Ned. I said only that the flames parted and the fortress gates opened. There are secrets to controlling the flow of water, to harnessing the power of heat. I do not propose wholesale slaughter, but the Lord of Light's fire can force Walder to yield without a protracted siege. Ned felt the eyes of the gathered lords upon him. He recalled the moment he'd summoned flame against Tywin, how raw and terrible it felt. Yet he also knew how many men would die if they tried to storm the twins the conventional way. Walder Frey had turned this into a personal feud. Maybe a display of power would break his resolve. He raked a hand through his graying hair. I will not burn the castle. I will not harm children. But if there is a way to force Walder to open the gates without a bloodbath, that might be worth considering. Melisandre dipped her head slightly as if acknowledging his caution. We can direct the fire at the water itself, heating it to steam. The illusions of an unstoppable inferno might drive the defenders to flee their posts. Coupled with your siege lines, it might be enough to break Walder's nerve and force a surrender. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the tent. The great Jon snorted. Heat the entire river? It's madness. Melisandre's lips curved into a mysterious smile. A portion near the fortress. Enough to create fear and chaos. Lawler's power is great. The details we can discuss in private. But it will require your father's presence, King Robb. The power that resurrected him flows in his veins. He must be the conduit. Robb looked sharply at Ned, clearly worried for his father's safety and well-being. That sounds dangerously close to the shadow sorcery you used in the south. Is it worth the risk? Ned's heart pounded. He remembered Barrack's warnings about losing a piece of himself each time he employed such powers. Yet he also pictured the alternative. Rows of ladders, men swarming under arrow fire, drowning in the cold river as they tried to cross. The freed fell by the dozens or hundreds. The winter storms closing in, the entire campaign delayed, allowing the Ironborn or Bolton to further ravage the north. And how many innocents in the twins might die in a full-scale assault? He drew a breath, meeting Robb's gaze. It may be. If we can do it in a controlled way, forcing Walder's men to abandon the walls, letting us in with minimal bloodshed. We must be careful. I do not want to become a monster. Robb nodded, jaw tight. If anyone can keep you from crossing that line, it's you, father. Just be wary. So they agreed. The officers looked uneasily at one another as though they'd all stepped onto a path lined with curses and wonders. The plan, as Melisandre laid it out, required Ned to stand at the southern edge of the river at dawn, focusing his will on the water under her guidance. She would invoke Lawler's flame while Ned channeled the power that pulsed in his blood. The great Jon muttered that it sounded more like an Associ ritual than honest warfare, but he kept his peace. If it saved the lives of their men, perhaps it was worth a try. That night, Ned barely slept. He walked along the low banks near the camp, feeling the chill breeze off the Green Fork. Moonlight reflected on the dark current. On the far bank, he could make out the silhouette of one of the twins, a squat shape with torchlit windows. He thought of Walder Frey's brood, his wives, children, grandchildren, so many branches of that fractious house. Ned did not wish to kill them, nor any who had no hand in Walder's cruelty. But they could not remain blocked from crossing if they were to save Winterfell. Catelyn found him there, gazing at the water. She slid an arm around his waist, resting her head on his chest. He felt a pang of guilt, recalling how changed he was. Still, she drew close. What burdens your mind, husband? He exhaled, staring out over the moonlit river. The choice. Using the Red God's power to sow fear or harm. I used it in the heat of battle to slay Tywin. Now I consider it to break the twins without bloodshed, or so I hope. But the line between necessity and atrocity is thin. I saw how easily men can become lost in this war. Catelyn's voice was gentle. You have always stood for justice. If you must call upon this power, you will do so carefully. I trust that you will not let it twist you. He turned, resting his cheek on her hair. The memory of King's Landing, of the Black Headsman's blade, flickered through him. I want only to see our children safe. To see the North united against the winter that comes. I never thought I'd stand here, calling upon sorcery. Catelyn's hand tightened around his. We adapt or we die. That is how we survive. The old gods watch over us still, Ned. Do what you must. He kissed her brow, grateful for the steadiness of her presence. That night, he dreamed fitfully of steam rising from the river, of the tower gates bursting open, of Walder Frey crying out in terror. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, uncertain if that vision was a promise or a warning. At first light, the plan was set in motion. Ned donned a simple leather cuirass rather than heavy plate. Melisandre insisted he must be unencumbered. He approached the southern bank with a handful of guards, including Catelyn and Robb, while the rest of the army positioned themselves out of arrow range. Hidden behind ridges, the Greyjohn's men prepared rafts and bridging planks in case the Freys abandoned the walls. Archers lined up, ready to provide covering fire if necessary. On the fortress battlements, Frey crossbowmen jeered at the sight of Ned Stark stepping to the water's edge. Walder Frey himself could be glimpsed peering from a high window, or so one figure that might be him. Melisandre stood beside Ned, carrying a tall staff crowned with carved flames. She began chanting in her foreign tongue, voice low and resonant. Ned closed his eyes, breathing in the cold morning air. The sting of frost on his cheeks sharpened his senses. Melisandre's voice rose, and Ned felt a stirring in his blood like the pounding of a distant forge. He recalled Barrack's words about losing pieces of himself. He recalled the terror in Tywin's eyes at the last moment. Gritting his teeth, he focused on controlling that inner flame, harnessing it without letting it flare wild. A heat flared behind his eyelids. It began in the center of his chest, radiating outward to his arms and legs. In his mind's eye, he pictured the water in front of him, the swirling current. He called upon the fire in his blood to boil that water. At first, nothing happened. He could hear the distant taunts of the Fremen, the rush of the river, Melisandre's chant. Then, gradually, he sensed the water shifting, trembling. Steam started to rise in little wisps. A murmur went through the men on both banks as the center of the river began to bubble. Soon, roiling steam thickened, swirling in white clouds above the surface. The crossbowmen stopped jeering. Some stared in disbelief. A scalding mist billowed out, drifting toward the fry walls. The temperature around Ned soared, and sweat beaded on his brow despite the winter chill. He clenched his fists, forcing the power outward into the river, straining to keep it from raging uncontrollably. The water frothed, rising into hot vapor that blew in waves across the causeway leading to the fortress gates. Screams rose from Fremen stationed on the lower battlements where the steam enveloped them. Arrows fired blindly out of the mist, mostly falling short. Ned felt his heart hammer. This was no mere conjurer's trick. The entire portion of the river near the fortress was turning into a near-boiling swirl. Melisandre's chant grew louder, more insistent. Ned fought to keep a check on the surging flame within him. His shoulder wound burned, a searing pain that threatened to break his concentration. He saw flickers of bright orange in the steam, not actual fire but intangible shapes, illusions conjured by the Red Woman's incantations. To the phrase, it must have looked as if fiery spirits moved in the haze. Robb, watching from a safer vantage, felt the hair stand on his arms. Catelyn, near him, clutched his elbow, face pale. Across the bank, men stared in shock. Never in their lives had they seen such a display of elemental power. Within minutes, the lower walls of the twins were lost in thick clouds of scalding steam. Fry crossbowmen retreated upward, shouting in panic. Some tried to fling buckets of water on themselves, only to find the water near the fortress was nearly as hot as what they fled. Ned heard the clamoring of men within the walls, a chaotic drumming of fear. He forced his voice to carry over the river. "Walder Frey, this is your last chance. Open the gates, or we will bring more than steam." There was no immediate answer, but the commotion within the fortress swelled. Then a volley of crossbow bolts whistled out of the fog, ill-aimed. Ned raised his hand, and a curtain of superheated steam hissed upward, deflecting some of the shots. Others fell short or sank into the mud. The men behind Ned cheered, though their faces were taut with awe. The hiss of the river was nearly deafening now. Rivulets of boiling water lapped the stones near the fortress's southern tower. Through the roiling steam, a portion of the wooden palisade lining the approach caught fire, ignited by the intense heat. The flames crackled, sending plumes of dark smoke swirling into the haze. At last, a battered horn blast came from the fortress. Then, as though in answer, the southern gate opened slightly, revealing an iron portcullis. A man, likely a Fry captain, peered through the gap, shouting something unintelligible. Ned willed the steam to dissipate somewhat, letting it billow away on the wind. Robb signaled his men to prepare. Archers raised their bows. The Grachan's warriors hefted axes. If Walder Frey tried a trick, they would respond with steel. Ned and Melisandre let the power subside, though the heat in Ned's veins still pulsed fiercely. Through the thinning steam, they saw about a dozen Fry soldiers pushing the portcullis up, arms straining. Another pair unbarred the gates. Then an older man, stooped and white-haired, emerged, protected by a ring of guards. Even at a distance, the venom in his gaze was unmistakable. "Walder Frey." His voice came shrill across the water. "Damn you, Stark. Damn you all to the seven hells. You would scald us like dogs." Ned lifted his voice, calling back, "You refused all attempts at parley. We need to cross. We gave you warning. Now open your gates and yield, or we continue. The choice is yours." Walder sputtered, eyes bulging. His guards looked terrified, battered by the searing mist. The old man cawed, "You want the crossing so badly? You can have it for now. But you'll regret it, Stark. Mark my words." He coughed, wiping spittle from his chin. "Lower the drawbridge," he barked to his men, who leapt to obey. A creaking chain groaned, and the drawbridge slowly descended over the steaming waters. Robb wasted no time. He bellowed to his men, "Archers, stand ready. Infantry, move." The Greyjoy's force surged forward, crossing the field. Ned watched as they approached the newly lowered drawbridge. Frey soldiers retreated inside, pikes at the ready, but under Walder's shrill commands, they did not engage. Robb spurred his horse and galloped, Grey Wind at his side, with the Greyjoy and others behind him. Within moments, they were at the mouth of the fortress bridge, the precarious walkway spanning the Green Fork. The water beneath still frothed with residual heat, steam drifting upward. Carefully, they rode onto the drawbridge. Frey soldiers glowered from the towers but offered no fresh volley of bolts. Ned closed his eyes a moment, letting out a trembling breath. The power in him receded, but he felt drained, his limbs heavy. Melisandre's chanting slowed. "It is done," she murmured. "Walder knows the cost of defiance. You have spared many lives." "Perhaps," Ned said, turning away from the bank. He felt relief, but also a profound exhaustion. How many times could he tap this power before it burned him hollow? He shoved that thought away. For now, they had the crossing. He returned to camp to rejoin Catelyn, the tension easing in his chest. She embraced him, letting her tears fall against his tunic. "Gods be praised, Ned. That could have ended far worse." Robb's men soon seized the gatehouse from within. Walder Frey raged and cursed, but the display of fiery sorcery had shaken even his obstinacy. Under close guard, Walder agreed to let the entire northern host cross, though he refused to greet them with hospitality or hold a feast. "Don't expect bread and salt from me," he spat at Robb. "Cross and be gone. You can keep your damn fire to yourself." Robb accepted that for now. The Northmen marched through the twins in orderly ranks, wary of treachery, but Walder's men stood aside, sullen and cowed by the memory of the steaming river. Indeed, as Ned passed through the fortress halls, escorted by a contingent of archers, he noticed scorch marks along the stone. The heat had reached inside, though not enough to burn the entire keep. Several young Freys watched him pass, eyes full of silent fury or wide-eyed fear. It took 2 days for Robb's entire host to cross. By that time, Walder Frey had retreated to his solar with a handful of personal guards, refusing further conversation. Some of the bannermen urged that Walder be seized or executed. The Greyjoy rumbled that they ought to pay him back for all the trouble. But Robb and Ned decided it was enough to have the crossing. Committing a massacre inside the fortress would only inflame fresh feuds. Let Walder brood. They would press on. Thus the Northmen emerged on the far side of the Green Fork. Fresh snows fell, dusting the fields white. They marched north in a long column, winding along roads turned to slush. Ned rode with Robb near the van, mindful of how the men eyed him differently since the display at the twins. Some seemed emboldened, others uneasy, but none questioned the necessity. Only a handful of men had died in that standoff, compared to the hundreds or thousands who might have perished in a prolonged siege. As they traveled, more tidings came by Raven. King's Landing reeled from the death of Tywin. Jaime Lannister had taken command of the Westerlands, rallying men in Casterly Rock's defense. Cersei had grown more erratic, rumored to suspect even her own allies of plotting against Joffrey. The Tyrells pressed their advantage, forging new deals behind the scenes. In the Vale, Peter Baelish was rumored to be maneuvering for influence over Lady Lisa and young Lord Robert. The realm splintered further each day, but for the Starks, the priority was Winterfell. Scouts rushed ahead, bringing uncertain reports. The Ironborn still held some northern strongholds, but many had withdrawn to the coasts, bracing for retribution. The bastard of Bolton might be prowling the countryside with his flayers, or might have returned to the Dreadfort. It was all confusion. At Moat Cailin, they discovered Ironborn defenders had partially abandoned the old fortress. The battered towers stood half-collapsed, waterlogged from the swampy terrain. A few dozen Ironborn reavers tried to contest the march, but Robb's men swiftly overwhelmed them, capturing the remnants. From one sour-faced reaver, they learned that the Ironborn had grown discouraged. Hearing that the king in the north still lived and that Ned Stark had returned from the grave. "We're no wights or demon lovers," the reaver spat. "We just want your coasts, not all this frozen inland." Robb ordered the reavers executed for their ATR. Ossities in the north. Then the host pressed on. The cold intensified, wind slicing across the plains north of Moat Cailin. Wolves howled at night. The men spoke of the long night with increasing dread. But the banners of House Stark fluttered proudly, and the presence of both Robb and Ned, father and son, stoked a sense of destiny among them. If they could retake Winterfell, perhaps the old ways would be restored. Perhaps they could truly unite the North. The final days of marching to Winterfell were fraught with apprehension. Which horrors would they find there? Would the seat of House Stark be in ruins, as rumor said? Had Theon Greyjoy truly murdered Bran and Rickon? Or was there any chance the boys lived? Ned rode in tense silence for long stretches, memories colliding within him. He recalled the crypts beneath Winterfell, the statues of ancient Stark kings. And he thought of how he, who once lay dead, was returning to the place of his forefathers. Winterfell itself came into view one afternoon, its stone walls dusted in fresh snow, the towers battered. Plumes of faint smoke rose from a corner of the keep. As the northern host drew nearer, they saw evidence of partial ruin. Sections of the outer walls had collapsed or were scorched black. The main gate stood battered, propped with makeshift repairs. Robb's outriders approached cautiously, half expecting archers or ambush. But none came. Within the yard, they discovered a pathetic handful of ironborn stragglers under the command of a minor captain. The man surrendered immediately when faced with the assembled might of House Stark. "We're all that's left," he muttered. "Most left months ago, after that bastard Bolton's men swept through. Couldn't hold the castle, too many ghosts. We just survived on scraps." Robb's anger flared, but he kept calm. He had the men taken into custody, leaving the Great John to keep an eye on them. Then father and son dismounted and walked into the courtyard of Winterfell. The stones underfoot were cracked, some blackened by fire. A hush fell over the host as they spread out, exploring. Stark banners soon replaced the iron Kraken flags that had hung limply from the ramparts. Ned gazed around, eyes tracing the broken structures. The old stables had caved in, roof burned. The main keep stood, but half the windows were boarded. The great hall's door was splintered. The gods would remained, its towering trees a hushed sanctuary, though branches drooped under frost. Smoke drifted from a corner near the kitchens. Winterfell was wounded, but not entirely dead. Catelyn, riding in behind them, dismounted slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. She had called Winterfell home for many years, and seeing it in this condition broke her heart. What happened here? Is there anyone still alive within these walls? A soft cry answered her from the shadows. Osha, the wildling woman who'd once served as a caretaker for Bran, emerged with a spear in hand, face gaunt. She stared at Ned as though seeing a specter. You can't be." Her eyes darted to Robb, to Catelyn, to the assembled men. Then her shoulders sagged in relief. "Gods be good. It's over then. The Ironborn are done." Catelyn rushed forward. "Osha, where are my sons? Bran? Rickon?" Osha's gaze dropped. "I protected them as long as I could, my lady, but things went wrong. The bastard of Bolton's men came, burned the place. I helped Bran and Rickon slip away, but we got separated. Hodder carried Bran, me and Rickon tried to follow. Then some of us parted. I came back, hoping to find them if they returned. Been hiding here for weeks, scrounging. I haven't seen them since." She seemed on the verge of tears. "I don't know if they made it out alive." A hush fell. Catelyn trembled. Ned steadied her. The possibility that Bran and Rickon might still live out in the wilds or lost somewhere under Bolton's threat gave them a spark of hope and terror. Ned asked, voice tight, "Did you see them killed? Do you know anything of Theon's claim that he murdered them?" Osha shook her head emphatically. "He never did. Those 2 charred bodies he showed were some peasant boys. Sickening business. But your sons escaped. Whether they still live, I can't say. But they weren't murdered that day." Relief flickered in Ned's eyes, a relief tempered by dread at not knowing Bran and Rickon's fate. Catelyn clutched his hand. "At least there's hope," she whispered. "They're out there somewhere. We can search." Robb's men fanned through Winterfell, reclaiming the old castle. Over the coming days, they cleared rubble, repaired broken gates, patched the great hall's roof. A grim sense of purpose fell on them. This was their ancestral seat, and they would rebuild it come what may. Ravens flew out to the northern lords, calling them to reaffirm fealty. Some had already marched with Robb, but others, like the Umbers, the Manderleys, the Glovers, needed to know that Winterfell stood again under House Stark's banner. Ned walked the battlements in a haze of memories. He passed the places where his children had once run, laughing. Visions flickered before him, almost like ghosts. Young Arya chasing cats, Sansa gazing dreamily out a window, Bran perched on the walls. He felt the weight of the second life he'd been given pressing on him. If only he had been here to protect them from all this. Yet the future beckoned. The threat of the White Walkers could not be ignored. Ned wrote to the Night's Watch, informing them that the North was rallying, that House Stark had returned to Winterfell. He urged the Watch to send any information they could about movements of the others or the wildlings. He thought often of Jon Snow, wondering if his bastard son still served along the wall, and if so, whether Jon had encountered the terrors that stirred beyond. As the days passed, lords and knights from across the north began to arrive. Galbart Glover came with a modest retinue, shaken by the ravages of war but eager to serve the Starks again. Lady Sibel Locke, representing a lesser house sworn to the Boltons, arrived under a white flag, uncertain of her future. Wyman Manderley sent word that he was provisioning ships at White Harbor, readying a force to join them once the winter storms eased. The Umbers were already in Robb's host. The Boltons themselves remained suspiciously absent. Meanwhile, Ned's presence caused a stir among the new arrivals, many of whom had sworn fealty to him as Lord of Winterfell in the past. They stared in open wonder at the resurrected Ned Stark, who moved among them with grave composure, his hair flecked with white at the temples. Some knelt, murmuring that the old gods had blessed them by returning their lord in their hour of need. Others seemed uneasy, spooked by the faint warmth that clung to him even in the cold, or by how his eyes caught the torchlight like banked coals. Yet none dared question that he was truly Ned. He recalled the names of their families, the corners of their holdfasts, old stories from before the war. Robb, for his part, began planning how to drive out the last pockets of Ironborn and quell any Bolton insurgency. Scouts returned with stories of small battles in the woodlands where loyal Stark men clashed with Bolton men. The bastard of Bolton, Ramsay Snow, was rumored to be roving the countryside, terrorizing peasants for sport. No sign of Roose Bolton himself. Some said he was still in the south, others that he had taken refuge at the Dreadfort. The north was vast, and winter roads were perilous. One pale morning, a rider came from the wall, half dead with cold. The man carried a letter from the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, George Mormont, though rumor said Mormont might have perished in a mutiny at Craster's Keep. The letter was disjointed, possibly old, but it warned that wildlings gathered in huge numbers beyond the wall, fleeing something worse in the far north. The others were real, and the Watch needed aid. Another note pinned beneath it, scrawled in a tighter hand, bore the signature of Samwell Tarly. It confirmed that George Mormont was indeed dead, that the Night's Watch was reeling, uncertain who now led. They cried for any help the North could spare against a threat that dwarfed all mortal wars. Ned read it with a churning in his gut. He showed it to Robb that evening by the flickering light of Winterfell's repaired hearth. "This is what we feared," Ned said quietly. "The war for the throne, the war with the Lannisters, these are but preludes. The real battle lies beyond the wall." Robb nodded, shoulders tight. "But we can't simply march north yet. We have to secure the north from the Boltons and the Ironborn, or we'll be pincered. We need unity, or we'll be fighting a war on two fronts." Ned rubbed his temple. The old memories of winter pressed on him. "Then we must rally quickly. Call every bannerman, drive out the Ironborn, subdue the Boltons, and see if they will bend the knee or face destruction. We have no time for half measures." A day later, scouts brought news. Ramsay Snow had been sighted near the Hornwood lands, pillaging and terrorizing peasants. Another rumor suggested he might hold hostages northerners who served the Hornwoods. The name struck Ned like a blow. House Hornwood had lost its lord and heir in the war, leaving a widow who had vanished, rumored to have been abducted by Ramsay. At once, Robb ordered a detachment of cavalry to strike into Hornwood territory. Ned volunteered to lead them. Catelyn objected, concerned for his safety, but he insisted, remembering his vow to protect the people of the north. "I will not hide behind these walls while Ramsay burns villages. We must make an example of him." Robb relented, but insisted on sending men to accompany Ned. The great Jon was delighted to join, thirsting for a good fight. So they rode out from Winterfell, a few hundred strong, searching the cold, snowy hills. They passed scorched crofts, frightened peasants who cowered at the sight of armed riders until they recognized the dire wolf banners. Some knelt before Ned, sobbing that the bastard of Bolton had taken their kin. Ned's heart burned with righteous fury, remembering the day he'd once considered pardoning Roose Bolton for his earlier betrayals. Could he have prevented this horror if he'd recognized the nature of that house? They followed the trail of burned hamlets to a forested area near the White Knife's tributary. There, a local guide whispered that Ramsay's men had holed up in a small keep, the old stronghold of the Hornwoods foresters. By nightfall, Ned and the Great John had positioned their forces for an assault. Through the swirling snow, they saw the keep's outline, stone walls, a single tower. Torches flickered along the battlements. The Great John rumbled in a low voice, "We'll scale those walls. Their numbers can't be large. We take them by surprise, break them before they can harm any more hostages." Ned nodded, pulling up the hood of his cloak. "No mercy for Ramsay. But if any innocents are inside, we must protect them." They moved swiftly under cover of the storm. Archers lined up, crossbows cocked, swords drawn. A group of men carried a makeshift battering ram. On Ned's signal, they rushed forward, the Great John letting out a thunderous war cry. Arrows and bolts whistled from the darkness, finding gaps in the Bolton men's defenses. The gate to the keep shuddered under repeated blows. A panicked shout rose from inside. Then the battered gate burst inward, letting Ned's men flood through. Fierce fighting erupted in the courtyard. Bolton men wore ragged armor with the flayed man's sigil scrawled in blood as if to mock decency. They met the stark onslaught with savage desperation. Ned pressed forward, sword in hand, ignoring the searing protest of his old wound. He called upon no flame now, determined to fight as a Stark of old, steel in hand. The Grey John rampaged beside him, carving a path through shrieking defenders. Suddenly, a rasping voice echoed from the tower steps. "Stark, so you do live, you old fool." A man in black leathers, pale-faced, thin-lipped, advanced. He carried a crossbow aimed at a trembling figure, a woman in torn clothing, a Hornwood servant pinned before him like a human shield. "Leave me be, or she dies." Ned's breath misted in the cold air. "Ramsay Snow," he said, stepping carefully closer. "Release her, and we might show you mercy." Ramsay let out a harsh laugh. "Mercy? From you? They say you died, Stark. Then you rose again with demon fire. Perhaps I should see if you can die a second time. Or perhaps I should show you what real torment looks like." Ned advanced another step, heart-pounding. He saw the madness in Ramsay's eyes. This was no typical renegade, this was a sadistic monster. The Grey John was nearing from one side, but Ramsay's crossbow pressed against the captive's throat. "Back off," Ramsay hissed, glancing around. "You can't kill me without losing her. Maybe I'll take a piece of her first." His lips twisted in a sick grin. Ned froze, mind racing. Could he manipulate the heat in the air to distract Ramsay? He hesitated, one misstep, and the woman died. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw something move. A white shape streaked across the courtyard. Grey Wind. The dire wolf, separated from Robb, had come with Ned's party. Now the beast lunged out of the snow, silent as a wraith. Ramsay heard a snarl too late. He tried to whirl, but Grey Wind slammed into him, jaws clamping on his arm. The crossbow fired, the bolt flying wild. The captive woman collapsed to the ground, screaming. Grey Wind bore Ramsay to the icy stones, shaking him like a rag doll. Ned rushed forward, grabbing the trembling woman and pulling her clear. Bolton men tried to intervene, but the Great John's axe met them with a thundering blow. In seconds, Ramsay's face was twisted in agony, pinned under Grey Wind's crushing jaws. He managed a ragged scream as the dire wolf bit into his shoulder. Ned's men formed a ring. Some had their swords raised, uncertain whether to finish Ramsay. The Great John barked a laugh, "Tear him apart, the bastard." But Ned advanced, voice cold as northern wind. "Hold, Grey Wind. Leave him." Grey Wind hesitated but obeyed Robb's father, releasing Ramsay's shredded arm. Ramsay gasped, blood oozing. His face contorted with hatred. You can't kill me. My father will, eh?" Ned stared down at him with steady eyes. "Your father, if he's still among the living, has much to answer for. As do you." Ramsay spat blood, face pale. "Go on then, kill me, O righteous Ned Stark. I'll see you in the seven hells." Ned knelt, pressing a dagger to Ramsay's throat. The circle of men waited, breath fogging. "I intend to take you to Winterfell to face justice. Your crimes demand a trial, even if the verdict is certain." A flicker of fear lit Ramsay's eyes. He tried to raise his torn arm, but Grey Wind's teeth had wrecked it. "You call that justice? You'll slaughter me like a dog." "You're no dog," Ned said. "You are a rabid beast in a man's skin. The North will see your atrocities answered." Ramsay shrieked in agony as Ned's men bound his ruined arm with rough cloth, hauling him upright. Freed captives poured from the tower, a handful of Hornwood folk, starved and terrified. They fell to their knees, thanking House Stark. Some wept at the sight of Ramsay's capture. Ned felt no joy, only grim resolution. This was but one piece of the puzzle. The bastard of Bolton was a rabid hound, but where was Roose? The North would not be safe until the entire House Bolton menace was addressed. They returned to Winterfell with Ramsay in chains, the Great John and the rest leading a ragged column of rescued folk. Word spread swiftly. The bastard of Bolton was taken by Ned Stark himself. The castle erupted with grim satisfaction at the news. Robb, on hearing the details, nodded curtly. We'll put him on trial. If Roose Bolton dares surface to defend him, we'll face that as well. Catelyn asked quietly, and then what? Ned's face was somber. Then we see if the Boltons will accept the king in the North's justice or choose open rebellion. Either way, we secure the North. After that, he glanced toward the Maester's tower where letters from the wall waited. We must not ignore the threat from beyond. In the following days, Ned convened a solemn tribunal in Winterfell's Great Hall, still scarred from the burning but functional enough to hold court. Northern lords who had arrived for the mustering gathered in the hall. Ramsay was dragged forward, his arm bound in splints, face contorted with pain. Witnesses described the atrocities: flaying, rape, murder of innocents. The bastard only sneered and cast insults, spitting that the Boltons had as much right to rule the North as the Starks. But the room's verdict was unanimous. He was condemned to death. Ned himself, at Robb's urging, took up a borrowed sword. Ice was lost, but a stout northern blade would do. He remembered the old ways. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He felt a terrible sense of déjà vu as he swung, recalling how his own life had ended in King's Landing. The stroke was clean. Ramsay's head rolled across the floor. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of torches. Some men muttered quiet approval. Others looked grim. With that single blow, House Bolton was left in disarray and no direct heir but Roose. If Roose refused to bend the knee, it meant open war. If he agreed, perhaps the North would unify. Days stretched into a week, men scouring the roads for signs of Bolton forces. They found none. Word came that Roose Bolton might be hiding in the dread fort with a small retinue, uncertain how to proceed. The North was falling under Stark control again, from White Harbor to Bear Island. A sense of somber triumph spread. With Winterfell reclaimed and the greatest immediate threats quieted, Ned, Robb, and the Lords turned their attention to the looming winter and the plea from the Night's Watch. They still lacked news of Bran and Rickon. Catelyn prayed each night for their safe return. Meanwhile, Sansa and Arya's fates remained uncertain in the south. But the dead did not wait for family reunions. The White Walkers would come unstoppable unless the realm united. So it was decided. Robb would remain in Winterfell to solidify the North's defenses, continuing to muster new levies, repair roads, and coordinate with each stronghold. Ned, with a hand-picked force, would ride for the Wall. The Great John volunteered to come, as did many of the men who longed to face a threat they barely comprehended. They would bring supplies, reinforcements, and a plea to the Watch: let us stand together. The old words echoed in Ned's mind: night gathers, and now my watch begins. He had never taken the Black, but he felt a kinship with those who guarded the realm's northern border. As Ned prepared to depart, many of the newly arrived northern lords approached him, some kneeling, some weeping in gratitude that Eddard Stark lived. He accepted their oaths to King Robb, urging them to serve loyally. Melisandre would accompany him, though she revealed little of what she planned. She only whispered of the long night and the flame that must stand against it. The day Ned set out from Winterfell, dawn was a pale, icy gold. He stood in the courtyard, wrapped in a new wolfskin cloak, observing the battered yet standing walls. He closed his eyes, recalling the courtyard as it once was, full of life. Then he opened them, scanning the men who would ride with him, an assortment of knights, archers, Mormont warriors, and a group of old veterans eager to face any foe to defend the North. The Great John hefted his axe and roared a body farewell to Robb's men. "Cat." Ellen embraced Ned one last time. "Go, do what must be done. I will remain here with Robb in case we receive any word of the children. We'll pray for your swift return." Ned felt warmth in his chest, not the red flame, but the old warmth of home. "The North has endured so much, Cat. Let us hope we can endure what's yet to come." He turned to Robb, clasping his son's forearm. "I'm proud of you, Robb. King in the North. Keep our people safe. If the Boltons strike, remind them who holds Winterfell." Robb nodded, eyes fierce. Grey Wind stood at his side, ears alert. "I will, Father. Send word if the Watch needs more men or if the others truly appear. The entire North will rally to your call." Ned mustered a small smile. "Let us pray they do not appear at all. But we must be ready. Winter is here." With that, he mounted his horse. Melisandre rode beside him, the Great John close behind. The gate opened, revealing a landscape of white drifts and wind-blown fields. They pressed forward, leaving Winterfell behind, a forlorn but enduring bastion of Stark rule. The men trooped out, crunching through the snow, banners rippling in the cold breeze. As the column traveled north, Ned reflected on the strange path that had brought him here, beheaded in King's Landing, resurrected by the Red Woman's fire, slayer of Tywin Lannister, liberator of the twins through a conjuring of steam and flame, restorer of Winterfell's rightful seat. Now he rode to the wall, uncertain what horrors lay beyond. Yet he felt no fear. The North had faced dark times before, in the ancient days when the others first came. If he and Robb could unite the living Northmen and perhaps the entire realm, then maybe they stood a chance. He could almost sense the eyes of the old gods upon him. Even in death, he had not escaped his duty. Like Beric Dondarrion, he was a revenant on a mission, a last bulwark against the coming night. The crisp air stung his cheeks, but his blood ran warm with the flame he carried. In the swirling sky above, crows cawed, as if heralding the next chapter in the long war between ice and fire. No man could say what fate awaited them at the wall, or whether the White Walkers gathered in massive numbers. No man could say what challenges would arise from the scattered powers in the south, Cersei, Stannis, the Tyrells, even rumors of dragons across the narrow sea. But Ned Stark, the fiery wolf of the north, rode onward without turning back. He was resolved to face the threat of winter with sword, flame, and the unyielding resolve of a Stark. And with every hoofbeat in the snow, he felt both the old gods and the red god bearing witness to the shape of destiny. The direwolf banner streamed behind him, and in its wake, the men followed, carrying with them the final hope that the living might stand as one when the true storm arrived.